In the savage empire of Velkaris, they measured worth in fangs and fury. Children shifted before they could speak. Wolves howled through bloodlines like inheritance. And the girl who never transformed? She became the family's dirty secret, the shame they buried alive while she still breathed. Lyessa Vane learned early that invisibility was survival. Her father drowned his disappointment in bottles. Her fiancé shredded her heart in front of the entire pack for a woman with claws. Then the Iron King walked into that room full of perfect daughters dressed in silver and jewels, and he chose the broken girl in the back wearing rags she stitched herself. One sentence, 4 words, "This one is mine." And the empire lost its goddamn mind. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about power. Drop a like and comment your city below, so I know my tribe is listening. The morning Lyessa Vane turned 22, her father did not acknowledge her existence. She woke before dawn in the smallest room of their decaying estate, a space barely larger than a closet with walls that sweated moisture during winter and baked her alive during summer. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight as she dressed in the same faded gray dress she wore most days, the fabric thin enough to see her silhouette when the light hit wrong. Her fingers moved automatically through the motions of living, braiding her dark hair, washing her face in cold water from the basin, avoiding her reflection in the cracked mirror propped against the wall. Mirrors told truths she did not need repeated. Downstairs, her father sat slumped at the kitchen table with a bottle already half empty beside his plate. Marcus Vane had been handsome once, before disappointment carved trenches across his face and liquor bloated his features into something unrecognizable. He did not look up when Lyessa entered, did not speak, did not acknowledge the daughter who reminded him daily that his bloodline had failed. In Velkaris, bloodlines were religion. Shifting was proof of worth, and Lyessa had never felt the wolf beneath her skin. Hollowborn, they called her. Empty, broken, wrong. She moved through the kitchen quietly, pulling yesterday's bread from the cupboard, slicing it thin to make it last. Her father's breathing filled the silence, heavy and wet like something dying. She wanted to ask him if he remembered what day it was, wanted to see if somewhere beneath the alcohol and shame, the man who used to carry her on his shoulders still existed. Instead, she ate her bread standing up and left without a word. The Vane estate sat on the outskirts of Shadowfen, a territory that produced some of the Empire's finest warriors but treated its weakest members like rot that needed cutting away. Lyessa walked the dirt path toward the village center as morning light bled through the forest canopy overhead. Other pack members passed her without acknowledgement, their eyes sliding over her as though she were furniture, a ghost haunting familiar spaces. Invisibility became armor when you wore it long enough. She reached the market square as vendors set up their stalls, the smell of fresh bread and smoked meat mixing with the earthy scent of mud and morning dew. Lyessa had no money for luxuries. She came here because working kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. Old Marta, who sold herbs and dried flowers, allowed Lyessa to help in exchange for scraps and the occasional copper piece. Marta's stall stood in the corner, weathered wood and faded fabric that had seen better decades. The old woman looked up as Lyessa approached, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and hard-earned survival. "Your father's still drinking himself dead?" Marta asked without preamble. "Every day," Lyessa replied, kneeling to help unpack bundles of dried lavender. Marta grunted. "Waste of a man. Your mother would have gutted him for what he's become." Lyessa said nothing. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, bleeding out on a birthing bed while Lyessa took her first breath. Some in the pack whispered that the baby had been cursed from the start, that she'd stolen her mother's wolf to survive and came out hollow anyway. Her father never confirmed or denied the rumors. He just drank harder each year. They worked in silence, arranging herbs, tying bundles, preparing for customers who would come and go without seeing the girl kneeling in the dirt. Lyessa had perfected the art of being useful without being noticed. She knew which nobles wanted their purchases wrapped in specific colors, which warriors preferred their medicine bundles tied with leather instead of twine, which vendors would spit at her feet if she made eye contact. The market filled as the sun climbed higher. Voices rose in haggling and gossip, laughter and argument mixing into the familiar symphony of pack life. Lyessa heard fragments as she worked. "Did you hear? The king is hosting the imperial mating ceremony next month. About time. Empire needs heirs. Wonder which pack will finally catch his attention. My money's on the Blood Moon Alpha's daughter. That girl could tear through steel. The Iron King doesn't want someone who can tear through steel. He wants someone who can stand beside him without flinching. Good luck finding that. Most women turn to water when Ravian Drakhar walks into a room. Lyessa kept her head down, hands moving through the work. She had heard stories about King Ravian her entire life. The warlord who conquered 7 territories before 30. The Alpha so powerful his wolf was said to be pure shadow, a creature of nightmare and dominance. Men spoke his name with reverence. Women spoke it with hunger. Lyessa had never seen him. Girls like her did not attend royal events or imperial gatherings. She existed in the margins, invisible to power. The morning passed slowly. Customers came and went, coins changed hands. Marta sold her herbs and sometimes remembered to share the profits with the girl who did half the work. Lyessa did not complain. Complaining required believing you deserved better. Around midday, a commotion rippled through the market square. Lyessa looked up to see a group of young pack members approaching, their laughter sharp and cruel as broken glass. She recognized them immediately. Children of the territory's ranking families, born with power and bred to wield it without mercy. Leading them was Kyle Thornridge. Lyessa's chest tightened. Kyle had been handsome in the way predators often were, all sharp edges and confident swagger. They had been engaged once, a contract arranged when Lyessa was 16 and people still held hope she might shift late. Her father had celebrated, drunk on the possibility that his daughter might salvage their family name. Then Lyessa turned 18 without transforming. Kyle rejected her 3 days later. In public. In front of the entire pack council. He had stood before the assembled families and declared that he would not bind himself to broken goods. That the Thornridge bloodline deserved better than a hollow girl who could not even produce a wolf. Lyessa had stood there silently while he dismantled her worth piece by piece, his words precise and devastating. The worst part was not the rejection. It was the relief in her father's eyes when it happened, as though losing his daughter's engagement confirmed something he had always known but never voiced. "You were right to throw her away," his expression had said. "She was never worth keeping." Now Kyle approached Marta's stall with his pack trailing behind, their eyes bright with the particular cruelty of young people who had never known consequence. He stopped directly in front of Lyessa, close enough that she could smell the expensive oils in his hair and the arrogance radiating from his skin. "Still crawling through dirt, Hollowborn?" His voice carried across the square, designed for maximum humiliation. "I thought you would have learned your place by now." Lyessa did not look up. She tied another bundle of lavender with steady hands, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. Kyle's boots slammed down on the herbs she had just arranged, scattering them across the ground. His friends laughed, the sound like wolves circling wounded prey. "Answer me when I speak to you." Marta started to rise, her face twisted with anger, but Lyessa touched her arm gently. The old woman's intervention would only make things worse. Pack hierarchy was absolute. Defending a Hollowborn against a ranked Alpha's son was social suicide. "I am working," Lyessa said quietly, gathering the scattered herbs. As you can see, Kyle crouched down, forcing her to meet his eyes. He had changed since their engagement ended. His face had hardened into something meaner, his wolf closer to the surface, always prowling beneath his skin. "You know what I heard?" He spoke loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I heard the king is holding the imperial mating ceremony at Dread Marrow Palace. Every eligible daughter from every major pack is being summoned." Lyessa said nothing. "Can you imagine?" Kale continued, his smile vicious. "The greatest warriors and nobles in the empire, all gathered to win the king's favor. And then there's you. A girl so worthless her own father drinks himself unconscious to forget she exists." The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the spectacle of public humiliation the way flies were drawn to rotting meat. Lyessa felt their eyes on her, felt the familiar weight of being seen only as entertainment, a cautionary tale mothers use to frighten their daughters into obedience. "Shift for us, Hollowborn." Kale's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. "Show everyone what makes you so special. Show us the wolf you've been hiding all these years." "I cannot shift," Lyessa said. Her voice did not shake. That much, at least, she had learned to control. You know this, because you are broken. Yes. The word hung in the air like confession. Kael's expression shifted, disappointment replacing cruelty for just a moment. Once, he had looked at her differently. Once, before the weight of pack expectations crushed whatever softness existed between them, he had held her hand and whispered promises about building a future together. Then she failed to transform, and promises became ash. He stood abruptly, wiping his hands on his pants as though touching her had contaminated him. The Empire is gathering its strongest daughters for the king, he announced to the watching crowd. Warriors. Leaders. Women who could stand beside the Iron Alpha and build a dynasty worth remembering. And here in Shadowfen, we have this. He gestured at Lyessa like she was evidence of cosmic failure. This is what happens when bloodlines forget the importance of strength. The crowd murmured agreement. A few laughed. Most just stared with the detached curiosity of people watching someone else's tragedy. Kael turned to leave, his pack falling in behind him, but he paused at the edge of the stall. Do yourself a favor, Hollowborn. He did not look back. Stay far away from Dreadmarrow. The king does not need to see what weakness looks like. They left in a wave of laughter and casual violence, pushing through the market like a storm moving through without care for what it destroyed. The crowd dispersed slowly, returning to their own lives, the entertainment over. Marta knelt beside Lyessa, her weathered hand touching the girl's shoulder with rare gentleness. You should have let me gut that arrogant pup. Lyessa gathered the scattered herbs mechanically, her hands steady despite everything. It would not have changed anything. Maybe not, but it would have felt good. A small smile ghosted across Lyessa's face, gone almost before it appeared. She finished bundling the lavender, tying each piece with careful precision. Work was meditation. Routine was survival. They spent the rest of the afternoon in silence, the kind of companionable quiet that came from shared understanding. Marta had lived long enough to know that some battles could not be fought with claws and fury. Some battles required simply refusing to die when the world expected you to lie down. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Marta pressed 3 copper coins into Lyessa's palm. Go home, girl. Get some rest. Lyessa wanted to argue, wanted to say she would rather stay here than return to the estate where her father's disappointment hung in the air like smoke, but Marta's expression brooked no disagreement. She walked home through lengthening shadows, the forest path familiar beneath her feet. The Vane estate appeared through the trees like a monument to decay, its once proud walls crumbling, its gardens choked with weeds, its windows dark and lifeless. Inside, her father had graduated from the bottle on the table to the one in his hand, his eyes glazed and distant. Lyessa moved past him like a ghost, climbing the stairs to her small room. She lit a single candle and sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the cracked mirror that reflected a girl the world had decided was worthless. 22 years old, no wolf, no future, no one who saw her as anything beyond a cautionary tale. She should have been used to it by now. But some wounds never stopped bleeding, no matter how many times you learned to hide the blood. 3 weeks later, everything changed. The summons arrived on a morning that started like any other. Lyessa woke before dawn, dressed in her faded gray dress, descended the stairs to find her father already drunk. She was pulling on her worn boots when someone knocked on the front door. Imperial messengers did not knock on doors in Shadowfen, especially not doors belonging to disgraced families. Lyessa opened it to find 2 guards in the king's colors, their armor polished to mirror brightness, their expressions neutral and professional. Behind them stood an official in formal robes, holding a sealed scroll. Lyessa Vane of House Vane? The official's voice was crisp, bureaucratic. Yes, he handed her the scroll without ceremony. By order of King Ravian Drakhar, you are summoned to attend the imperial mating ceremony at Dreadmarrow Palace. You will depart in 3 days. Transportation has been arranged. Failure to appear will be considered an offense against the crown. Lyessa stared at the scroll in her hands as though it were a serpent. There must be a mistake. Oh, there is no mistake. All eligible daughters between the ages of 18 and 25 from registered pack families have been summoned. The official's tone suggested he had repeated this speech 100 times already. The king's decree is absolute, but I am eligible and summoned. The official cut her off. 3 days, Miss Vane. Do not be late. They left before she could form another protest, their boots crunching down the dirt path with military precision. Lyessa stood in the doorway holding the scroll, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Behind her, her father's chair scraped against the floor. What do they want? His words slurred together, barely comprehensible. I have been summoned to Dreadmarrow for the mating ceremony. Silence. Then laughter. Harsh, bitter laughter that sounded like something breaking. You? Marcus Vane stumbled into view, his face flushed, his eyes wet. They summoned you? The decree says all eligible daughters. You are not eligible for anything. Her father swayed, catching himself against the doorframe. You are a disgrace, a mistake, a hollow shell wearing my daughter's face. The words should have hurt. They had certainly hurt the first 100 times. Now they just settled over her like familiar weight, heavy but expected. I leave in 3 days, Lyessa said quietly. Do not embarrass us further. Her father turned away, reaching for another bottle. Go to their ceremony. Let them see what our bloodline produced. Let them laugh at you the same way everyone here has laughed for 22 years. He disappeared into the sitting room, his footsteps unsteady. Lyessa closed the door and looked down at the scroll in her hands. 3 days. Dreadmarrow Palace. The imperial mating ceremony, where the greatest daughters of the empire would gather to win the attention of the most powerful alpha alive. And somehow, impossibly, they had summoned her too. Bands. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and dread. Lyessa owned nothing appropriate for a royal ceremony. No fine dresses, no jewelry, no accessories that marked status or wealth. Marta helped her wash and mend her best gray dress, the one without visible stains or tears, and together they managed to make it look almost presentable. Almost. The morning of departure arrived cold and gray. Lyessa stood outside the Vane estate with a small bag containing everything she owned: 2 dresses, a worn cloak, a hairbrush with missing teeth, and the 3 copper coins Marta had given her months ago that she had never found reason to spend. Her father did not come outside to say goodbye. The imperial carriage arrived precisely at dawn, pulled by 6 massive horses and flanked by guards. Other carriages were already collecting daughters from across Shadowfen, young women dressed in silk and jewels, their families gathered to send them off with pride and expectation. Lyessa climbed into her assigned carriage alone. No family to wave goodbye. No well wishes. No one who cared whether she returned. The journey to Dreadmarrow took 4 days across territories Lyessa had never seen. She shared her carriage with 3 other girls from different packs, all of them daughters of ranking families, all of them beautiful and powerful and utterly dismissive of the quiet girl in the faded dress who sat in the corner and spoke only when directly addressed. They talked endlessly about the king. Have you seen him? Only once, from a distance. He is massive, terrifying. They say his wolf is the size of a war horse. I heard he killed his own father to take the throne. I heard he has never taken a lover because no woman has ever been strong enough to survive him. I heard he can kill with a glance, that his shadows can tear through armies. The gossip flowed like wine, each girl trying to outdo the others with rumors and speculation. Lyessa listened in silence, watching the landscape roll past the carriage windows. Forests gave way to mountains, mountains to valleys, valleys to the sprawling capital city that surrounded Dreadmarrow Palace like a living organism. The palace itself rose from black stone, a fortress of obsidian and ancient power that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Towers pierced the sky, walls stretched for miles. Banners bearing the king's sigil snapped in the wind, black fabric with silver wolves that looked ready to leap from the cloth and devour anyone foolish enough to approach without invitation. The carriages deposited their passengers in waves, each girl met by attendants who whisked them away to prepare for the ceremony. Lyessa found herself in a preparation chamber with dozens of other daughters, all of them being dressed and painted and adorned with the kind of wealth she had only ever imagined. Servants moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, transforming already beautiful girls into walking masterpieces. No one approached Lyessa. She stood against this wall in her gray dress, watching the transformation, feeling the familiar weight of invisibility settle over her like a second skin. One servant finally noticed her. "Are you not preparing?" I have nothing to prepare with, Lyessa said simply. The servant's eyes widened slightly, taking in the faded dress, the lack of jewelry, the absence of anything that marked wealth or status. Did your family not provide? No. The servant's expression flickered between pity and discomfort. She started to say something, stopped, then simply nodded and moved away to attend to girls who mattered. Lyessa stood alone while the room filled with perfume and laughter and the bright, sharp energy of women preparing for war disguised as courtship. Hours later, they were escorted to the Great Hall. Dreadmarrow's throne room was a cathedral of power. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting dancing light across black stone. The floor was polished obsidian that reflected everything like dark water. And at the far end of the hall, elevated on a platform of carved stone, sat the throne. Empty. The king had not yet arrived. The daughters were arranged in carefully orchestrated rows, organized by pack status and bloodline strength. The most powerful families stood at the front, their daughters dressed in silver gowns that cost more than entire estates, their necks adorned with jewels that could feed villages for years. Lyessa stood in the very back, behind girls from minor packs, behind illegitimate daughters of forgotten bloodlines, behind everyone the empire had decided mattered even slightly. She did not belong here. Everyone knew it. The girls around her whispered among themselves, stealing glances at her faded dress, her plain appearance, her complete lack of anything that suggested she deserved to breathe the same air as true alpha daughters. Why is she even here? Look at her dress. Is that what they wear in the outer territories now? Probably some clerical error. They will send her home after the ceremony. Lyessa stood very still, hands folded in front of her, eyes fixed on the empty throne. This would be over soon. The king would choose someone powerful and beautiful and worthy. Then she could return to Shadowfen and resume being invisible in familiar spaces. A horn sounded. The great hall fell instantly silent. Doors at the far end opened, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. King Ravian Drakhar entered his throne room like a natural disaster taking human form. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet of pure muscle and controlled violence. His hair was black as midnight, pulled back from a face that could have been carved from granite by a sculptor who understood brutality. Scars marked his skin, each one a story of survival and conquest. His eyes were the gray of storm clouds before lightning struck. But it was his presence that truly dominated the space. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, an almost physical pressure that made every wolf in the room instinctively lower their gaze in submission. Shadows seemed to gather around him, darkness that moved with intention, alive and watchful. This was the Iron Alpha, the man who conquered territories, the king who killed without mercy, the ruler the empire both worshipped and feared. He ascended to his throne with movements that suggested violence barely contained, each step deliberate and predatory. When he sat, the entire hall seemed to exhale. His eyes swept across the assembled daughters. Hundreds of the empire's finest women stood before him, each one bred for power, trained for dominance, prepared to stand beside a king and build dynasties that would last centuries. His expression revealed nothing. An official stepped forward, beginning the formal ceremony with words about bloodlines and legacy and the sacred duty of producing heirs worthy of the empire. Lyessa stopped listening. She focused instead on counting the seconds until she could leave, calculating how quickly she could reach the exit once this humiliation ended. The king stood. The hall held its breath. He descended from his throne, moving past the front row of daughters without a glance, past alpha heirs in silver gowns, past warrior queens offering themselves like prizes, past nobles who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. Each step took him deeper into the assembly, past the second row, the third. The whispers started when he passed the fifth row without stopping. What is he doing? Why is he walking past the Blood Moon daughter? Where is he going? Lyessa looked up. The king was walking directly toward the back of the hall, directly toward her. Her heart stopped. This was not possible. The greatest daughters of the empire stood between her and the throne, each one infinitely more valuable than a hollow girl in a faded dress. But Ravian Drakhar walked past all of them without hesitation, his gray eyes locked on something only he could see, and that something was her. Girls scrambled out of his path. The entire hall turned to watch. He stopped directly in front of Lyessa Vane, this massive king who conquered empires, this alpha who made grown warriors weep with fear, this man who had never bowed to anything in his entire life. He stood there, close enough that she could see the scars on his knuckles, smell the leather and steel that clung to his clothes, feel the weight of his attention like a physical force. Then he reached out and lifted her chin with one scarred hand, forcing her to meet his eyes. The throne room dissolved into shocked silence. "This one is mine." 4 words, spoken with absolute authority. 4 words that shattered every rule the empire had been built upon. The hall exploded. Nobles shouted in outrage. Daughters wept. The royal council erupted in chaos. But King Ravian Drakhar did not acknowledge any of it. He stood looking down at the discarded girl the world had thrown away, and something in his storm-gray eyes suggested he had just discovered the rarest treasure alive. Lyessa could not breathe, could not think, could not process the impossibility of what was happening. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely audible beneath the surrounding chaos. The king's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been recognition, because everyone else in this room sees weakness when they look at you. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something only she could hear. "I see survival." And then he turned to face the empire he ruled, keeping one hand on Lyessa's trembling shoulder, a gesture of protection and possession that would alter the course of kingdoms. The girl who had spent 22 years being invisible suddenly found herself standing at the center of everything, chosen by the one person whose opinion carried the weight of empires. And in that moment, Velkaris began to realize something terrifying. Their king had not chosen power. He had chosen something far more dangerous. He had chosen someone with nothing left to lose. The chaos in Dreadmarrow's throne room did not fade. It escalated. Nobles shouted over each other, their voices rising in pitch and fury as they processed what had just happened. The king had chosen a nobody, a hollow girl in a faded dress who could not even shift. The insult cut deeper than any blade because it was not just a rejection of their daughters. It was a rejection of everything the empire believed it stood for. Lord Velor, the king's uncle and master of the imperial council, shoved his way through the crowd with the kind of authority that came from decades of manipulating power. He was a tall man, silver-haired and sharp-featured, with eyes that calculated profit and loss in every interaction. He stopped 10 feet from Ravian, close enough to be heard but far enough to avoid directly challenging the king's physical dominance. "You cannot be serious." Ravian did not turn his head. His hand remained on Lyessa's shoulder, steady and possessive. She could feel the heat of his palm through the thin fabric of her dress, could feel the barely controlled violence radiating from him like a furnace. "I am always serious, Velor. This girl has no wolf, no power, no bloodline worth preserving." Velor's voice carried across the hall, performing for the nobles who watched like spectators at an execution. "You have insulted every major pack in the empire by choosing refuse over royalty." The temperature in the room dropped. Shadows began pooling around Ravian's feet, darkness that moved independently of the torchlight, alive and hungry. "Say that again." Velor's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe. A recognition that he had pushed too far too fast. But he was committed now, his reputation staked on this confrontation. "I said this girl is refuse, she is worthless, and by choosing her, you make yourself look weak." The nobles held their breath. Lyessa felt Ravian's hand tighten slightly on her shoulder, not enough to hurt, but enough to feel the tension singing through his muscles. She wanted to tell him it was fine, that she was used to being called worthless, that the words did not cut her anymore. But she could not speak, could not move, could only stand there while the empire decided whether she deserved to exist. Ravian finally turned his head to look at his uncle. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, calm, the kind of calm that preceded slaughter. "You mistake value for usefulness, Velor. You always have. They are the same thing." "No!" Ravian stepped forward, and the entire hall flinched. "They are not. Usefulness can be manufactured. A sword is useful. A soldier is useful. A breeding mare is useful. But value..." He looked back at Lyessa, and something in his expression softened fractionally. "Value is what survives when usefulness runs out." What does that even mean? It means this girl has lived 22 years in a world that told her she was worthless every single day. Ravian's voice gained edge, steel beneath silk. She survived being unwanted without becoming cruel. She survived being discarded without breaking. That is not weakness, uncle. That is strength most rulers will never possess. The hall erupted again. Half the nobles shouted agreement with Velor, calling the king's choice madness. The other half remained silent, calculating how this shift in power might affect their own positions. And scattered throughout the crowd, a few looked at Lyessa with something that might have been curiosity. What had this hollow girl done to earn the Iron Alpha's protection? Velor pressed his advantage. You conquered 7 territories through violence and dominance. You built this empire on the backs of the strong, crushing the weak. And now you stand here defending a girl who represents everything we fought to eliminate. He gestured at the assembled daughters, their silver gowns and jeweled crowns catching torchlight. These women are warriors, leaders. They could give you heirs worthy of your legacy. I do not need warriors who know only how to destroy, Ravian said. I need someone who remembers how to build. You need someone who will not embarrass you the moment other kingdoms see what you chose. Then other kingdoms will learn to see value in places they stopped looking. Ravian turned his back on Velor, a deliberate insult that made the entire council inhale sharply. He looked down at Lyessa, his storm-gray eyes searching her face. Can you walk? The question surprised her. Yes. Then walk beside me. We are leaving. He started toward the throne room exit, his stride steady and unhurried, and Lyessa found herself moving with him, her legs responding before her brain fully processed the command. The crowd parted like water around them, nobles stepping back as though the king's choice might be contagious. Lyessa caught fragments of whispers as they passed. She is nothing. Look at her dress. This is madness. The king has lost his mind. Each word landed like a familiar blade. She had heard them all before, in different contexts, from different mouths. The specific insults changed, but the message remained constant. You do not belong. They reached the massive doors at the hall's entrance. Guards pulled them open without being asked, their expressions carefully neutral. Ravian did not pause, did not acknowledge the chaos erupting behind them. He simply walked out of his own mating ceremony with the one girl nobody expected him to choose. Lyessa followed because she had no idea what else to do. The hallway beyond the throne room was quieter, though she could still hear shouting echoing through the stone corridors. Ravian led her through passages she could not track, turning corners with the familiarity of someone who knew every inch of his fortress. They climbed stairs, crossed bridges between towers, moved deeper into the palace until the sounds of the ceremony faded into distant memory. Finally, Ravian stopped before a set of ornate doors guarded by 2 soldiers who snapped to attention at his approach. Leave us, he ordered. The guards vanished instantly. Ravian opened the doors and gestured for Lyessa to enter. She hesitated, her mind racing through possibilities, trying to understand what was happening and failing completely. The room beyond was clearly the king's private quarters, massive fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the capital, furniture that looked expensive and rarely used, everything decorated in blacks and grays and deep crimsons, colors that matched the man who occupied the space. Lyessa stood just inside the doorway, acutely aware that she had just entered the most powerful man in the Empire's bedroom. Ravian closed the doors behind them. The silence felt heavy. He moved to a table near the fireplace and poured 2 glasses of wine from a crystal decanter. He held one out to her. Drink. I do not drink wine. Drink it anyway. You look like you are about to shatter. Lyessa took the glass with trembling hands, not because she wanted wine, but because refusing felt dangerous. She sipped it carefully, the liquid burning down her throat, warmth spreading through her chest. Ravian drained his own glass in 2 swallows and set it down with more force than necessary. Ask your questions. Lyessa stared at him. I have too many questions. Start with the first one. Why did you choose me? Ravian turned to face her fully, and for the first time since entering the throne room, she got a clear look at him without the pressure of hundreds of watching eyes. He was even larger up close, built like something designed for war. Scars marked his forearms, his knuckles, disappearing beneath his clothes to places she could only imagine. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as storm clouds, tired, so incredibly tired, because everyone else in that room was performing, he said quietly. playing roles they had practiced their entire lives. Warrior princess, noble heir, perfect breeding stock. He moved to the window, looking out over the city lights below. They all wanted something from me: power, status, access to the throne. And I do not? Lyessa heard herself ask. Ravian's mouth quirked, almost a smile. You did not want to be there at all. You stood in the back, hoping no one would notice you existed. That alone made you more honest than every other woman in the hall. That is not a reason to choose someone. No. He turned back to her. But surviving 22 years of being told you are worthless without becoming bitter? That is, you do not know anything about me. I know enough. Ravian crossed his arms, leaning against the window frame. I know you have been engaged and rejected. I know your father is a drunk who blames you for your mother's death. I know your pack calls you Hollowborn like it is a curse instead of a name. Lyessa's chest tightened. How do you know all that? I make it my business to know about threats and opportunities. You registered as neither, which made you interesting. He paused. So I had you investigated. You investigated me. The words felt absurd in her mouth. Why would you waste resources on someone like me? Because 3 months ago, there was a fire in Shadowfen's eastern district. 12 families lost their homes. And while the Pack Council argued about jurisdiction and responsibility, one girl spent 2 weeks helping rebuild housing for people who had spent years treating her like trash. Lyessa remembered. The fire had started in the tannery district, spreading fast through the cramped wooden structures where the lowest-ranking pack members lived. She had helped because no one else would, because leaving people homeless felt wrong, even if those same people had mocked her entire life. That was just basic decency. Exactly. Ravian's expression hardened. And basic decency is the rarest resource in this empire. Rarer than gold. Rarer than power. I have spent 10 years conquering territories and consolidating control, and I can count on one hand the number of people who showed kindness without calculating what they would gain from it. So you chose me as some kind of experiment? To prove a point? I chose you because I am dying. The words hit like a physical blow. Lyessa stared at him, waiting for elaboration, but Ravian just watched her with those tired gray eyes. What do you mean dying? Exactly what the word suggests. He pushed away from the window, moving to pour himself more wine. Every Alpha King who has sat on Dreadmarrow's throne has carried shadow magic. It is what makes us powerful enough to hold the Empire together. But shadow magic is not meant for mortal bodies. It corrodes, poisons, eats away at you from the inside until there is nothing left. How long? 2 years. Maybe 3 if I am lucky. He drank, his throat working as he swallowed. I have spent a decade building this empire, crushing rebellions, eliminating threats, consolidating power. And all of it will collapse the moment I die unless I leave behind something stable enough to survive without me. An heir, Lyessa said quietly. Eventually. But more importantly, a queen who will not tear the empire apart fighting over scraps of power. And you think I can do that? Lyessa's voice rose slightly, the absurdity finally overwhelming her shock. I cannot even shift. I have no political training, no military experience, no connections to any powerful families. What exactly do you think I can offer this empire? Humanity. The word hung between them. Ravian set down his wine glass and moved closer, stopping just beyond arm's reach. This empire was built on strength, he said, on dominance, on the strong crushing the weak until only the worthy survived. And that philosophy worked for a while. It unified the territories, eliminated threats, created stability through fear. But fear alone cannot sustain a kingdom forever. Eventually, people stop just surviving and start asking if they want to live in a world that values only violence. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I have spent 10 years maintaining control through brutality because that was the only language the Empire understood. But I am tired, Lyessa. Tired of executing people. Tired of crushing rebellions. Tired of ruling through fear. Then change how you rule. I cannot. Ravian's voice turned harsh. The moment I show weakness, every territory I conquered will rise up simultaneously. The council will move against me. The military will fracture. Everything I built will burn because this empire only respects strength. Then why choose me? If you need someone strong, because I am not looking for someone to maintain what I built. I am looking for someone to transform it into something worth preserving. Lyessa shook her head. You're asking the impossible. Maybe. Ravian moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. But you survived the impossible already. You survived being unwanted in a society that discards anything it cannot use. That takes strength most warriors never develop. Surviving is not the same as leading. No. But it is the foundation leadership should be built on. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face with surprising gentleness. Every other woman in that hall would have taken the throne and used it to settle scores, to punish the people who wronged them, to prove their worth through domination. And I would not? No. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. You would try to fix things, build things, make things better. Because despite everything the world did to you, you still believe people deserve kindness. You do not know that. Yes. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I do. They stood there in the firelight, this massive king who conquered empires and the discarded girl the world threw away, and Lyessa felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but recognition. The kind that came from two people who had spent their lives bleeding internally while pretending to be whole. What happens now? She asked. Now we deal with the fallout. Ravian stepped back, the moment breaking. The council will push back. The nobility will scheme. Other packs will see this as weakness and test our defenses. That sounds exhausting. It will be. He moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. They will try to break you, isolate you, turn you into a symbol of my failure, and when that does not work, they will try to kill you. Lyessa's blood went cold. Kill me? You represent a threat to everything they believe in. Ravian glanced at her over his shoulder. If a hollow girl can become queen, it means their entire system of value is wrong. They cannot allow that. Then send me home. Lyessa's voice came out stronger than she expected. I did not ask for this. I do not want to die for your political experiment. Too late. Ravian turned fully, his expression hardening back into the Iron Alpha the Empire feared. I claimed you publicly. That makes you mine. And I protect what is mine. I am not a possession. In this empire, everyone is a possession. Power, status, life, death. All of it belongs to whoever is strong enough to hold it. He crossed his arms. But I will offer you a choice. What choice? Stay here. Accept the role. Let me teach you how to navigate court politics and survive the people who want you dead, or leave. I will provide you with enough money to disappear into any territory in the Empire. New name, new life. You will never have to see Shadowfen or your father or any of the people who made you feel worthless ever again. Lyessa stared at him. Why would you let me go? Because forcing you to stay makes me no different than everyone else who used you without asking what you wanted. The offer was genuine. She could see it in his eyes. He would actually let her walk away from all of this, give her the resources to build a new life somewhere far from empires and politics, and the constant weight of being unwanted. It was the first real choice anyone had offered her in 22 years. She thought about Shadowfen, about her father drinking himself dead, about Kael's public rejection, about Marta's kindness and the market stalls where she worked for scraps, about spending the rest of her life invisible and safe and alone. Then she thought about the way Ravian had walked past hundreds of perfect women to choose her. Not because she was useful, but because he saw value everyone else missed. If I stay, she said slowly, what exactly are you asking me to become? My queen? My partner? The person who proves that this empire can value something beyond violence. That is a lot of pressure to put on someone who could not even earn her own pack's respect. I know. Ravian's expression softened fractionally. But I also know you are stronger than you believe. And I am willing to bet everything on that strength. Even your throne? Especially my throne. Lyessa looked around the king's chambers. Fireplace casting shadows on stone walls. Windows overlooking a city she had never seen before today. Furniture that cost more than her family's entire estate. Everything foreign and overwhelming and terrifying. But also. A chance to be something more than the girl everyone discarded. I will stay, she heard herself say. Ravian's eyes widened fractionally, surprise breaking through his controlled expression. You are certain? No. Lyessa met his gaze directly. But I'm tired of being certain only that I am worthless, so I will try this instead. Something that might have been respect flickered across Ravian's face. Then we start tomorrow. Start what? Teaching you how to be a queen, how to survive court politics, how to recognize threats, how to defend yourself when I am not present. How long will that take? Ravian's mouth quirked. Probably longer than I have left, but we will do what we can. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. You will have chambers prepared, guards assigned. Tomorrow we will begin properly. But tonight, get some rest. The council will be working all night to find ways to remove you. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be. It is just the truth. He opened the door, then looked back at her one more time. Thank you. For what? For staying. Even when leaving would have been easier. He left before she could respond, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Lyessa stood alone in the king's chambers, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the past few hours. She had been chosen by the most powerful man in the empire. She had accepted a role she had no training for. She had painted a target on her back that would never disappear. And somehow, for the first time in 22 years, she felt like maybe she was worth something more than everyone assumed. The servants who came to escort Lyessa to her chambers moved with the careful neutrality of people who had survived court politics by never expressing opinions. They led her through corridors she would never remember, up staircases that all looked identical, past guards who did not acknowledge her existence. Her chambers were enormous. Sitting room with furniture that looked antique and expensive. Bedroom with a bed large enough for 4 people. Bathing room with a stone tub that could double as a small pool. Wardrobes filled with dresses she had not ordered. Everything decorated in deep blues and silvers, colors that felt cold after the warmth of Ravian's fireplace. The servants left her alone with instructions that attendants would arrive in the morning to help her prepare for the day. Lyessa stood in the center of her new bedroom, surrounded by luxury she had never imagined, and felt completely isolated. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to run back to Shadowfen, where at least the pain was familiar. Instead, she walked to the window. Dreadmarrow spread below her like a living organism, thousands of lights marking homes and businesses and lives she would never touch. Somewhere in that sprawl, people were talking about what happened today, about the king's insane choice, about the hollow girl who somehow convinced the Iron Alpha to claim her. They probably thought she had seduced him somehow, used some trick or manipulation to steal a crown she did not deserve. The truth was simpler and stranger. She had just stood there being unwanted, and that had been enough. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting servants. Instead, a woman entered who clearly was not a servant. She was perhaps 40, with silver-threaded dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that calculated everything they saw. Her dress was expensive but practical, cut for movement rather than display. She moved like someone who had spent time on battlefields. "You are Lyessa Vane." "Yes. I am Commander Shayera, head of palace security and the king's personal guard." The woman did not offer pleasantries or false warmth. "I am here to assess whether you are a threat." Lyessa blinked. A threat to what? To the king? To the empire? To stability? She circled Lyessa slowly, her gaze dissecting. "Ravian claims you are not a political plant or an assassin, but it is my job to verify such things. I am neither of those things." "That is what every plant and assassin would say." Shayera stopped in front of her, arms crossed. "Tell me about your life in Shadowfen." "There's not much to tell. I worked in the markets, helped rebuild homes after the fire, avoided my father." "No lovers?" "No." "No secret alliances with rival packs?" "No." "No communication with anyone outside Shadowfen?" "Just Marta. She sells herbs. She is 70 and barely leaves her stall." Shayera's expression remained neutral. "What do you want from this arrangement?" "I do not know yet." Wrong answer. Everyone wants something. The commander leaned closer. "Power? Status? Revenge on the people who hurt you? I want to not be invisible anymore." The honesty seemed to surprise Shayera. Her eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing. Why did you accept the king's offer? Because he offered me a choice when no one else ever had. Shara stepped back, her posture relaxing fractionally. You are either the most genuine person I have met in this palace or the best liar. She moved toward the door. Either way, you will be watched. Guards will be stationed outside your chambers at all times. You go nowhere without escort. You speak to no one without my approval. Understood? Am I a prisoner? You are a target. Shara's voice turned hard. Half the Empire wants you dead. The other half wants to use you. My job is making sure neither happens. So yes, you will be watched. Constantly. How comforting. It is not meant to be comforting. It is meant to keep you alive long enough to prove whether you deserve the position the king gave you. She left without waiting for a response. Lyessa stood alone again, the weight of her new reality settling over her like chains made of gold. Chosen by a king. Hated by an empire. Marked for death by people she had never met. She moved to the enormous bed and sat on its edge, her faded gray dress looking obscene against the expensive linens. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would have to become someone she did not know how to be. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But tonight she was still just Lyessa Vane, the hollow girl who survived being unwanted, and that girl had just made the most dangerous choice of her life. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if survival alone would be enough to weather what came next. Wondered if Ravian truly saw value in her, or if he was just a dying king desperate for something to believe in before the darkness took him completely. Wondered if she was strong enough to become the person he claimed to see. The questions circled like wolves, and Lyessa closed her eyes against them, knowing sleep would not come easy, knowing that rest was a luxury she might never experience again. Because she had walked into the throne room as nobody, and walked out as the future queen of an empire that wanted her dead. That was not the kind of promotion people survived. But then again, she had built her entire life on surviving things that should have killed her. Maybe this would be no different, or maybe this time survival would not be enough. The morning arrived too quickly. Lyessa woke to servants entering her chambers before dawn, carrying trays of food and basins of hot water. They moved with practiced efficiency, preparing her for a day she had no blueprint to navigate. One older woman approached with an armful of clothing. The king has requested your presence in the War Council chamber at midday. You will need appropriate attire. Lyessa looked at the dress the woman held. Deep blue silk that probably cost more than her father's estate. Silver embroidery along the neckline and sleeves. Material so fine it looked like water frozen into fabric. I cannot wear that. You must. The servant's tone allowed no argument. You are to be presented as the king's chosen. Appearing in that, she gestured at Lyessa's gray dress crumpled on the floor, would be an insult to the crown. So Lyessa allowed herself to be transformed. They bathed her in water hot enough to burn, dressed her in layers of silk and linen, brushed her hair until it shone, applied cosmetics to her face with precision that felt more like warfare than beauty. When they finished, Lyessa looked at herself in the full-length mirror and did not recognize the person staring back. She looked like a queen, felt like an imposter. The servants led her through the palace toward the War Council chambers, guards falling in behind her without being asked. Lyessa felt their presence like weight pressing on her shoulders, constant reminders that she was being watched, evaluated, judged. The War Council chambers sat in the palace's eastern wing, a massive room dominated by a table carved from a single piece of black stone. Maps covered its surface, marking territories and supply lines and troop movements. Weapons hung on the walls like decorations that could become functional at a moment's notice. Ravian stood at the table's head, surrounded by men in military uniforms and formal robes. He looked up when she entered, something flickering across his expression before his mask of control slammed back into place. Commander Shira stood to his right, her eyes tracking Lyessa's every movement. Lord Velor occupied the left side of the table, his expression carved from ice. The other council members turned to stare at the girl who had somehow become the center of imperial politics overnight. Ravian gestured to an empty chair beside his. Sit. Lyessa moved carefully, acutely aware that every eye in the room was calculating her worth and finding her lacking. She sat in the indicated chair, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. Gentlemen, Ravian's voice cut through the tension. We have business to discuss. Lord Velor leaned forward, his fingers steepled. We do indeed. Starting with the fact that you have destabilized the entire empire with your choice yesterday. I stabilized nothing, Ravian said calmly. The empire has been rotting from the inside for decades. I simply stopped pretending otherwise. By choosing a girl with no power, no connections, no value beyond your apparent fascination? By choosing someone who will not immediately start a civil war over succession rights. Velor's eyes narrowed. Explain. Every woman in that hall yesterday represented a major pack alliance. Ravian gestured at the map spread across the table. Choosing any of them would have elevated one territory above all others. The remaining families would have viewed it as a declaration of favoritism. Within a year, we would be fighting rebellions on 4 fronts. So instead, you chose no one. I chose someone with no political baggage, no alliances to honor, no debts to repay. Someone who can build relationships based on merit rather than obligation. She cannot even shift. One of the military commanders spoke up, his voice rough with decades of shouting orders. How is she supposed to command respect from alpha warriors? The same way I do, Ravian said quietly, through proving her worth rather than inheriting it. The room fell silent. Velor recovered first. You are gambling the Empire's future on a social experiment. I am gambling the Empire's future on change. Ravian's voice hardened. This system of value we have built, where strength is the only currency that matters, has created a society that devours itself. Packs enslave their weakest members. Nobles sell children into military service. Warriors rape and pillage border territories because we have taught them that power justifies any action. That is how empires survive. Velor stood, his hands flat on the table. Through strength, through dominance, through eliminating weakness before it spreads. And where has that gotten us? Ravian matched his stance, the two men facing each other across black stone. Constant rebellions. Territories that rebel the moment my back is turned. A population that obeys through fear rather than loyalty. That is not an empire, uncle. That is a prison. Better a prison that stands than a paradise that collapses. Then we disagree on what makes a kingdom worth ruling. The tension in the room could have shattered glass. Commander Shara cleared her throat. If I may? Both men looked at her. The reality is that Lady Lyessa has been claimed publicly. She moved around the table, her military bearing evident in every step. Reversing that decision now would make the king appear weak and indecisive. It would invite challenges from every territory that senses opportunity. So you're saying we are committed to this madness? Velor's voice dripped contempt. I am saying the decision has been made. Now we deal with consequences rather than wasting time on regret. Lyessa sat silently through the exchange, feeling like a child watching adults argue about her fate. These people saw her as a problem to be managed, a symbol to be deployed, anything except an actual person. Ravian looked at her suddenly. What do you think? Every head in the room turned. Lyessa's throat went dry. About what? About the fact that half this council wants you removed and the other half wants to use you as a political tool. The honesty surprised her. She expected him to pretend everything was fine, to maintain the illusion of unity. Instead, he was asking her opinion in front of people who saw her as worthless. Lyessa took a breath. I think, she said slowly, that all of you are focused on the wrong question. Velor's eyebrows rose. And what question should we be asking? Not whether I deserve to be here. She met his gaze directly. But what I can do now that I am. Bold words from someone who has accomplished nothing. You are right, Lyessa's voice steadied. I have accomplished nothing by your standards. No battles won, no territories conquered, no enemies crushed beneath my heel. Exactly. But I rebuilt homes after the fire in Shadowfen. I fed people who were starving. I learned every guard's name in the market square because I believed they deserved to be seen as human beings rather than furniture. And that qualifies you to be queen. How? It qualifies me to remember what you have all forgotten. Lyessa stood, her hands flat on the table, mirroring the stance Ravian and Velor had taken. That the people you rule are not resources to be extracted. They are lives that deserve protection. The room went very quiet. Velor's expression shifted into something dangerous. You think compassion will hold an empire together? No. but it might give people a reason to want the empire to survive. Idealistic nonsense. Maybe. Lyessa shrugged. But your way has created an empire held together only by fear, and the king himself just admitted that is not working, so perhaps my idealistic nonsense is worth attempting before everything collapses anyway. Ravian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Velkaris looked like he had swallowed poison. The other council members shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to a hollow girl speaking to Lord Velkaris like an equal. "We are done here," Ravian said abruptly. "The council is dismissed. I will speak with Lady Lyessa privately." The men filed out slowly, throwing glances back at the girl who had just challenged the Empire's master strategist. Shara paused at the door, her expression unreadable, then nodded once to Ravian and left. The door closed. Ravian turned to Lyessa. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably stupid." Lyessa sat back down, suddenly exhausted. "But I'm tired of people talking about me like I'm not in the room." "Fair." Ravian moved around the table, leaning against it beside her. "But you need to understand something. Velkaris is dangerous. He has spent decades consolidating power through manipulation and strategic cruelty. Challenging him publicly makes you a target. I was already a target the moment you chose me. True. But there are degrees of targeting. Before, you were an inconvenience. Now you are a threat to his worldview. That makes you something he will actively work to eliminate. Then I will have to survive that too." Ravian studied her face, his gray eyes searching. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more fragile, more overwhelmed, more willing to hide behind me while others decided your fate. I spent 22 years hiding." Lyessa met his gaze. "I am tired of being invisible." Something shifted in Ravian's expression. Warmth, maybe, or recognition. "Good. Because what comes next will require you to be very visible indeed." "What comes next?" "Tomorrow night, there is a formal reception for the noble families. You will be presented officially as my chosen queen. Every major pack in the empire will be watching, judging, calculating whether you are a weakness they can exploit." "That sounds terrifying." "It will be." Ravian's voice softened slightly. "But I will be beside you. And I will teach you how to survive rooms full of people who want you dead. How long did it take you to learn?" "Too long. And I had military training and political education from birth. You have nothing." Lyessa finished for him. "I have nothing. You have more than you realize." Ravian reached out, tilting her chin up gently. "You survived being unwanted without becoming cruel. That is power most rulers never develop." "You keep saying that." "Because it is true." He released her, stepping back. "Now come, we have work to do before tomorrow night." "What kind of work?" "Teaching you how to recognize assassination attempts before they succeed." Lyessa's stomach dropped. "That seems important." "Extremely." Ravian moved toward the door. "And we are starting immediately because the clock is already counting down to when someone decides removing you is worth the risk of angering me." He opened the door, waiting for her to follow. Lyessa stood, smoothing her expensive dress with hands that trembled slightly. This was her life now. Assassination attempts, council meetings where she was valued less than furniture, tomorrow night facing an empire that wanted her removed. She should have been terrified, should have run while she still could. Instead, she walked toward the door where Ravian waited and felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Not confidence, not yet, but the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could become someone worth the risk he was taking. And in an empire built on discarding anything that was not immediately useful, that possibility felt more dangerous than any blade. Because if a hollow girl could prove she had value, it meant the entire system needed reevaluation. And systems protected themselves violently when threatened with change. Lyessa followed Ravian into the corridor. Behind them, in the War Council chamber, maps marked territories that would soon learn their future queen was not what they expected. Ahead of them, an empire waited to tear apart the girl who dared exist outside their definitions of worth. And between them, a dying king who had chosen to gamble everything on the one person everyone else threw away. The game had begun, and there was no going back. The formal reception hall blazed with enough candlelight to make the sun jealous. Lyessa stood at the entrance beside Ravian, wearing a gown that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime. Deep crimson silk that moved like blood when she walked. Silver thread embroidered into patterns that caught light and threw it back like small weapons. Her hair had been arranged into something elaborate that required 3 servants and an hour to construct. She looked like a queen, felt like prey dressed for slaughter. The hall stretched before them, filled with hundreds of nobles in their finest clothing, each one a predator in expensive fabric. They had come from every major territory in the empire, summoned to witness the king's chosen queen and calculate how her existence affected their own power. Ravian's hand rested at the small of her back, steady and warm. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "No." His mouth twitched. "Good. Fear keeps you alert. That is not comforting. It is not meant to be." A herald's voice rang out across the hall, announcing their arrival with formal titles that made Lyessa sound far more important than she felt. King Ravian Drakhar, Iron Alpha of Velkaris, conqueror of the 7 territories, and his chosen queen, Lady Lyessa Vane of House Vane. The crowd turned as one, hundreds of eyes fixing on the girl who had somehow convinced their king to choose refuse over royalty. Ravian descended the steps with her at his side, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to occupy space. People parted before them automatically, the way water parted around stone. Lyessa focused on breathing, on not tripping in her elaborate gown, on surviving the next few hours without humiliating herself or Ravian, or confirming every terrible thing these people already believed about her. They reached the center of the hall where a raised platform had been constructed specifically for this moment. Ravian guided her up the steps, positioning her beside him where everyone could see. Commander Shera stood at the platform's base, her eyes scanning the crowd with the constant vigilance of someone who expected violence at any moment. Lord Velkaris occupied a position of prominence near the front, his expression carved from ice and calculation. He had dressed in formal robes that announced his status without words, every detail of his appearance designed to remind people that he was the king's blood, the empire's strategist, a man who had shaped Velkaris long before Ravian took the throne. Ravian raised one hand, and the hall fell silent. "You have been summoned here tonight to witness the future of this empire." His voice carried across the space without strain, each word landing with the weight of absolute authority. "I have chosen Lady Lyessa Vane as my queen. She will stand beside me as we rebuild Velkaris into something stronger than fear alone can create." The crowd murmured, a sound like distant thunder. "Some of you question this choice," Ravian continued. "You see weakness where I see strength. You see worthlessness where I see value. That is because you have been trained to measure worth only in violence and dominance." He paused, letting the words settle. "That training has brought us to the edge of collapse. Our territories rebel constantly. Our people obey through fear rather than loyalty. Our strongest warriors spend their lives crushing threats that should never have emerged if we had built something worth protecting instead of something worth escaping." Lord Velkaris' expression darkened. "Lady Lyessa represents a different path." Ravian's hand moved to Lyessa's shoulder, a gesture of both possession and protection. "She has survived being discarded by learning compassion instead of cruelty. She has endured being unwanted without becoming bitter. That is the foundation I want this empire rebuilt upon." The hall erupted. Half the nobles shouted agreement, recognizing opportunity in the king's words. The other half shouted outrage, seeing their entire worldview under attack. Arguments broke out across the floor, voices rising in pitch and fury as centuries of social hierarchy felt themselves threatened. Lyessa stood very still, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes calculating her worth and finding her lacking. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to be invisible again because invisibility was at least safe. But Ravian's hand remained steady on her shoulder, an anchor in the chaos. The shouting gradually subsided as people remembered where they were and who was listening. Ravian waited until silence returned before speaking again. "Tonight, we celebrate the future. Tomorrow, we begin building it." He gestured to the musicians waiting in the corner. "Let the festivities begin." Music swelled through the hall, covering the remaining murmurs of dissent. Nobles began moving, forming clusters of conversation and conspiracy, their eyes tracking Lyessa's every movement. Ravian leaned close to her ear. "Survive the next 3 hours. Smile when necessary. Speak when spoken to. Do not accept food or drink from anyone except Commander Shiera or me. Because of poison? Because of everything. He stepped away to speak with a group of military commanders, leaving Lyessa standing alone on the platform like a monument to his controversial decision. Commander Shiera appeared at her elbow immediately. Walk with me. They descended the platform together, moving through the crowd. Shiera's presence cleared space around them, her reputation as the king's enforcer more effective than any announcement. Do not make eye contact with Lord Velor's faction. They will interpret it as weakness. How do I know who belongs to his faction? Anyone who looks at you like you are an insult to their bloodline. That is most of the room. Exactly. They moved past clusters of nobles who fell silent as they approached and resumed whispered conversations the moment they passed. Lyessa caught fragments of words. Worthless. Hollow. Mistake. Each one landing like a familiar blade. She had spent her entire life hearing these words. Somehow they still cut. A woman approached them, her gown a masterpiece of emerald silk and gold thread. She was perhaps 30, beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all sharp edges and calculated grace. Lady Lyessa. Her voice dripped false warmth. How wonderful to finally meet you. I am Duchess Seraphine of the North Marsh Territories. Lyessa inclined her head politely, remembering Ravian's instructions about basic court etiquette. Your dress is lovely, Seraphine continued, her eyes traveling over Lyessa's gown with clear dismissal. Though I confess I am surprised the king did not provide you with something more substantial. The silk is so thin, almost translucent in this light. The insult was delicate enough to have plausible deniability, but clear enough to draw blood. Commander Shiera's hand moved fractionally toward her blade. Lyessa touched her arm gently, stopping the motion. The king chose this gown himself, Lyessa said quietly. If you find fault with it, perhaps you should discuss your concerns with him directly. Seraphine's smile froze. I meant no offense. Of course not. Lyessa kept her voice even. Just as I am sure you meant no offense when you implied I was too worthless to dress properly. The Duchess's expression cracked slightly, surprise breaking through her practiced composure. I would never— You already did. Lyessa met her gaze directly. But I appreciate your concern for my wardrobe. I will be certain to consult you if I ever need advice on how to insult someone while pretending politeness. Shiera made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Seraphine's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, another voice interrupted. Well spoken, Lady Lyessa. Lord Velor approached them, his steps measured and deliberate. He stopped just outside arm's reach, his silver hair catching candlelight, his eyes calculating every detail of this interaction. Duchess Seraphine. He did not look at the woman. You are dismissed. Seraphine hesitated, caught between wanting to defend herself and recognizing a direct order from the Empire's second most powerful man. She chose survival, bowing stiffly and retreating into the crowd. Velor turned his full attention to Lyessa. You have sharp words for someone with no power to back them. I have survived 22 years of sharp words. Lyessa kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. I learned how they work. Did you? Velor circled her slowly, the way wolves circled wounded prey. Tell me, girl, do you know why the king truly chose you? Because he saw value no one else recognized. No. Velor's voice dropped, intimate and poisonous. Because he is dying and desperate for meaning before the darkness takes him. You are not his queen. You are his final delusion. A dying man's attempt to convince himself his life amounted to something beyond violence. The words hit like physical blows. Commander Shiera stepped forward, her hand on her blade. That is enough, is it? Velor ignored her, keeping his eyes locked on Lyessa. Because I think the girl deserves to know the truth. Ravian has perhaps 2 years left before the shadow magic consumes him entirely. When that happens, the Empire will collapse into civil war. Every territory we conquered will rebel simultaneously. And you, Hollow Girl, will be torn apart by the same people standing in this hall, pretending to celebrate your elevation. Lyessa's hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides, refusing to show weakness. Then I will have 2 years to prove I am worth keeping alive. Velor laughed, the sound harsh and without humor. You think you can change an empire in 2 years? We have spent centuries building this system. It survives because it is efficient. The strong rule. The weak obey or die. That is natural law. Natural law also says that systems which cannot adapt eventually collapse under their own weight. Spoken like someone who has read books but never commanded armies. Velor leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. You are going to fail, girl, and when you do, I will be there to pick up the pieces and restore order. The only question is whether you die quickly or slowly. He stepped back, his expression shifting to neutral politeness, as though they had been discussing weather instead of assassination. Enjoy the reception, Lady Lyessa. These gatherings can be so dangerous for those unfamiliar with court politics. He walked away, leaving Lyessa standing there with Commander Shera's hand on her shoulder. Breathe, Shera ordered quietly. Lyessa realized she had been holding her breath. She exhaled shakily, her heart hammering against her ribs. That was a direct threat. Yes. Should we tell Ravian? He already knows. Velor makes the same threat to everyone he sees as competition. Shera guided Lyessa toward the edge of the hall, away from the densest crowd. The question is whether he will act on it or just use it to keep you afraid. How do I know the difference? You do not. That is what makes him dangerous. They reached a quieter section near the windows overlooking the palace gardens. Lyessa pressed her hands against the cool glass, trying to steady herself. I am not built for this. No one is built for this. Shera's voice softened fractionally. Court politics is warfare by different means. You learn or you die. There is no middle ground. How long did it take you to learn? 10 years, and I had military training and family connections. You have neither, so I am going to fail. Probably. Shera's honesty was brutal, but somehow comforting. But failing is not the same as dying. Fail enough times and eventually you learn how to survive. That is not encouraging. It is not meant to be. It is meant to be true. Music swelled through the hall, signaling the beginning of formal dances. Nobles paired off, moving through choreographed patterns that had been perfected over generations. Lyessa watched them move, each step precise and practiced, everyone knowing exactly where they belonged in the intricate social dance. She did not know any of these dances, did not know the steps, did not belong in this world of practiced grace and calculated movements. Ravian appeared beside her without warning, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. Dance with me. I do not know how. I will lead. He offered his hand, waiting for her to accept or refuse. Lyessa looked at that scarred hand, remembering the way he had walked past hundreds of perfect women to choose her, remembering his words about seeing value where everyone else saw worthlessness. She placed her hand in his. They moved onto the floor together and the crowd fell silent, watching their king dance with the girl who had no business standing beside him. Ravian's hand settled at her waist, steady and sure. His other hand held hers with surprising gentleness. Follow my lead. Step back when I step forward. Turn when I turn. Trust me to keep you from falling. The music began. They moved. Lyessa stumbled through the first few steps, painfully aware that everyone was watching, that she was confirming every terrible assumption they had made about her worthlessness. But Ravian did not falter, did not show frustration, just guided her through the movements with patient strength, his body a solid anchor she could orient herself around. Stop thinking, he said quietly. Feel the rhythm instead. I am terrible at this. Everyone is terrible at first. That is how learning works. You are enjoying this. Watching you stand up to Duchess Seraphine and Lord Velor? Yes. His mouth quirked. You have more steel in your spine than I anticipated. I am terrified. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. He turned them smoothly, his movements making her look more competent than she was. But you stood your ground anyway. That is courage, or stupidity, often the same thing. They moved through the dance, and gradually Lyessa stopped focusing on the steps and started focusing on Ravian. On the way he moved with controlled violence barely contained, on the scars that marked his hands and disappeared beneath his formal jacket, on the tiredness in his eyes that never quite went away. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. Ravian's expression shifted, something raw breaking through his control. Because I am tired of ruling through fear alone. Because I want to believe that strength and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Because you survived being unwanted without becoming cruel, and that gives me hope that maybe this empire can do the same. That is a lot of pressure to put on one person. I know. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. But pressure creates either diamonds or dust. I am betting you are the former, and if you are wrong, then we both fail together. The music swelled toward its conclusion. Ravian turned them one final time, the movement bringing them face to face as the last notes faded into silence. The hall erupted in polite applause. Lyessa realized she had survived her first formal dance without completely humiliating herself. Small victories. Ravian released her slowly, his hands leaving her waist and fingers with obvious reluctance. You did well. I stepped on your feet 3 times. Only twice. I avoided the third one. A smile ghosted across Lyessa's face despite everything. Then the screaming started. It came from the far end of the hall, a woman's voice rising in terror. The crowd scattered like startled birds, nobles pushing past each other to escape whatever was happening. Commander Shera materialized at Ravian's side, blade already drawn. Stay with the king, she ordered Lyessa, then disappeared into the chaos. Ravian's entire body tensed, his wolf rising close to the surface. Shadows began gathering around his feet, darkness responding to the threat his instincts sensed. The crowd parted to reveal the source of the screaming. A body lay in the center of the hall. One of the servants who had been circulating with trays of wine and delicacies. She was young, maybe 16, dressed in the palace's serving uniform. And she was dead. Very dead. Her skin had turned gray, her eyes frozen wide in final terror. Black veins spiderwebbed across her face and hands, the distinctive mark of shadow poisoning, the same poison that was slowly killing Ravian from the inside. The hall descended into chaos. Nobles shouted accusations, guards rushed to secure the exits. Commander Shera knelt beside the body, her expression grim. Ravian moved toward the corpse with deadly calm, shadows swirling around him like living creatures. Lyessa followed despite every instinct screaming at her to run, because leaving him alone felt worse than staying close to death. Shera looked up as they approached. Shadow poison. Concentrated enough to kill within minutes. She stood, her eyes scanning the crowd. This was meant for someone specific. For me, Ravian said quietly, or for Lady Lyessa. Shera's voice was flat. Someone wanted to make a statement tonight. Lyessa stared at the dead girl, at the life extinguished to make a political point. Her stomach turned, bile rising in her throat. This girl died because someone wanted to kill me? We do not know that yet. Ravian's voice was controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath it. But someone used shadow poison at my formal reception. That is a direct challenge. Lord Velor pushed through the crowd, his expression carefully arranged into shock and concern. This is an outrage. Security should have prevented such a breach. Security did their job, Shera snapped. Someone inside the palace had access to shadow poison. That limits suspects significantly. Are you accusing the royal household? Velor's voice rose, performing outrage for the watching nobles. I am stating facts. Shera turned to face him fully. Shadow poison does not grow on trees. It requires extensive knowledge of forbidden magic and access to controlled substances. The pool of people capable of acquiring and deploying it is very small. Then perhaps we should investigate the king's new queen. Velor's words dropped into the hall like stones into still water. She is the only recent addition to the palace, the only person with motive to destabilize the empire. The accusation hung in the air, poisonous and calculated. Every eye in the hall turned to Lyessa. She felt the weight of their suspicion like physical pressure, hundreds of people deciding in real time whether she was capable of murder. Ravian's shadows exploded outward, darkness filling the hall like smoke. You will retract that accusation. His voice carried the weight of absolute command, the tone of a king who had conquered territories and would not hesitate to add skulls to his throne. Velor did not flinch. I am simply stating what everyone is thinking. The girl appears from nowhere. You choose her over every worthy candidate. And now someone dies from shadow poison at her first formal reception? The coincidence is suspicious. She has been in my sight all evening, Shera interjected. She did not go near the servant, did not handle any food or drink. did not have opportunity to poison anyone, unless she had an accomplice. The word echoed through the hall. Accomplice. The implication was clear. Lyessa was either a murderer or a pawn in someone else's game. Either way, she was a threat that needed eliminating. Ravian stepped forward, his massive frame radiating lethal intent. "You overstep, uncle." "Do I? Or am I the only one willing to speak uncomfortable truths?" Velkaris addressed the crowd now, performing for maximum impact. "This girl represents everything weak about the new direction our king wants to take. And now death follows her into our hall. Perhaps the Empire is trying to tell us something." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the nobles. Lyessa watched her future crumbling in real time. She had survived being unwanted, had survived public rejection, had survived 22 years of being called worthless, but she had never been accused of murder before, and she had no idea how to defend against a lie wrapped in enough truth to feel plausible. Ravian's hand found hers, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Lady Lyessa is innocent," his voice cut through the murmurs, "and anyone who suggests otherwise is challenging me directly." The threat was clear, but Velkaris had prepared for this moment, had calculated every angle, and he was not backing down. "Then let her prove her innocence." He gestured at the dead servant. "Let her submit to interrogation. Let her account for every movement tonight. Let her demonstrate that she had no knowledge of this attack." "She does not need to prove anything," Ravian snarled. "I have claimed her. That makes her innocent by my decree. That makes you a king willing to shield a potential murderer because you are too proud to admit your choice was wrong." The words landed like weapons designed to wound, because they were partially true. Ravian had bet his reputation on Lyessa, had claimed her publicly before the entire empire. Defending her now, regardless of evidence, would make him look weak and compromised, but abandoning her would make him look cruel and disloyal. Velkaris had created a trap with no clean exits. Lyessa understood with sudden, crystalline clarity that this had been planned. The poison, the accusation, the timing, all of it designed to force Ravian into an impossible position where any choice would damage his authority, and she was the weapon being used to wound him. She pulled her hand free from Ravian's grip. "I will submit to interrogation." "Lyessa," Ravian's voice held warning. "No." She faced the assembled nobles, feeling the weight of their judgment but refusing to hide from it. "If my innocence is in question, I will answer every question Lord Velkaris has, publicly, so everyone can witness the truth." "You do not need to do this," Shiera said quietly. "Yes." Lyessa's voice steadied. "I do. Because if I hide behind the king's protection, I prove I am exactly what they all believe. Weak, worthless, incapable of standing on my own." She turned to face Velkaris directly. "Ask your questions. I will answer them all." Velkaris' smile was a predator's smile, sharp and satisfied. "Very well. Let us begin with the most obvious question. Where were you when the servant was poisoned?" "Dancing with the king, in full view of hundreds of witnesses." "Before that?" "Speaking with Commander Shiera near the windows." "Can anyone verify that besides the commander?" Several nobles had been nearby. "I am certain they remember seeing us." Velkaris nodded slowly. "And before that?" "Standing on the platform beside the king while he addressed the hall." "So your entire evening has been spent in highly visible locations surrounded by witnesses." "Yes. Convenient. It is the truth. Truth is often convenient for those who plan carefully." Velkaris circled her the way he had earlier, performing for the crowd. "Tell me, Lady Lyessa, do you know what shadow poison is?" "I know it is killing the king." The hall gasped collectively. Ravian's expression went rigid. Velkaris' eyes gleamed with triumph. "And how would a girl from Shadowfen's outer territories know about the king's condition?" "That information is classified, shared only with the highest levels of the royal council." Lyessa's heart sank as she realized her mistake. She had revealed knowledge she should not possess, and Velkaris was weaponizing it instantly. "The king told me," she said quietly, "during our private conversations." "Convenient again." Velkaris' voice dripped poison. "Or perhaps you knew about shadow poison before arriving at Dreadmarrow. Perhaps someone sent you here specifically to exploit the king's weakness." "No one sent me. I was summoned by imperial decree." "A summons could be forged, Identities could be falsified. Vaelor moved closer, his voice dropping to something intimate and terrible. What better way to infiltrate the palace than by appearing as exactly what the king was looking for? A broken girl who needed saving. Someone who would trigger his protective instincts and bypass his usual suspicions. That is insane. Is it? Vaelor turned to address the crowd. Or is it brilliant? Send a girl with no apparent power, no obvious connections, someone so worthless that no one would suspect her of being a weapon aimed at the throne. And when she gets close enough, she strikes. I did not strike anyone. Lyessa's voice rose, desperation bleeding through. I have been here 3 days. I do not know how to acquire shadow poison. I do not know how to deploy it. I barely know how to navigate this palace without getting lost. Then perhaps your accomplice handled those details. I do not have an accomplice. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air. How was she supposed to prove a negative? How could she demonstrate she had no secret allies when absence of evidence was not evidence of absence? Vaelor had constructed the perfect trap. Every answer she gave could be twisted into proof of guilt. Every defense could be reframed as evidence of planning. He had spent decades mastering political warfare, and she was a girl who had learned survival in market stalls. She was going to lose. Ravian stepped forward, shadows exploding around him with enough force to crack the marble floor. Enough. His voice carried the weight of absolute command. This interrogation is over. Vaelor turned to him slowly. You are protecting her again, shielding her from accountability, proving to everyone in this hall that you care more about preserving your pride than discovering the truth. I care about preventing you from destroying an innocent person to advance your political agenda. My agenda is preserving this empire. Vaelor's voice hardened. Your agenda is protecting a girl you chose on impulse and are too stubborn to admit was a mistake. The words landed like physical blows because everyone in the hall knew they carried weight. Ravian had chosen Lyessa suddenly, without consultation, without following any of the established protocols. It looked impulsive. It looked emotional. It looked like exactly the kind of decision a dying king might make in desperation. And now Vaelor was using that perception to tear them both down. Lyessa watched Ravian's expression, watched the fury and frustration and exhaustion warring across his face. He was the most powerful alpha in the empire. He could kill Vaelor where he stood, could silence every doubter with violence, but that would prove Vaelor's point about ruling through fear alone, would demonstrate that Ravian could not defend his choices through reason and evidence, would make him look exactly as weak and compromised as the accusation suggested. Lyessa understood then what Vaelor had accomplished. He had created a situation where Ravian could not win. Violence would prove weakness, mercy would prove poor judgment, and she was the weapon being used to destroy the king from the inside. The realization hit with devastating clarity. She was not just a target, she was the trap itself. And by choosing her, Ravian had walked straight into it. Lyessa looked at the dead servant, at the nobles watching with hungry eyes, at Commander Shera calculating escape routes, at Ravian standing there with shadows swirling around him and nothing but bad choices ahead. Then she looked at Lord Vaelor and saw something in his expression that made her blood run cold. Satisfaction, complete and absolute satisfaction. Because this had never been about proving her guilt. It had been about forcing Ravian to defend the indefensible until the Empire lost faith in his judgment entirely. And it was working. She could see it in the faces of the nobles. The doubt, the suspicion, the growing belief that their king had made a catastrophic mistake and was too proud to correct it. Lyessa took a breath, made a choice. I will leave. The hall went silent. Ravian's head snapped toward her. What? I will leave Dreadmarrow, return to Shadowfen, remove myself from court politics entirely. Lyessa kept her voice steady, despite her shaking hands. If my presence is destabilizing the Empire, then the logical solution is removing that presence. No. Ravian's voice carried absolute denial. It is the only way to protect you. Lyessa met his eyes, willing him to understand. Vaelor is using me as a weapon against you. Every moment I stay, he gains more ammunition. But if I leave voluntarily, I remove his primary attack vector. You are not leaving. I have to. You are mine. Ravian's shadows expanded, filling the hall with darkness. I claimed you. I chose you. and I do not abandon what is mine, even when keeping me destroys you?" The question hung between them like a blade. Ravian stared at her, his gray eyes wild with something that looked like fear. Real fear. Not fear of death or defeat or any physical threat. Fear of losing something he had just found. "Please," Lyessa whispered, "let me go. Let me save you the only way I can." No. The word was absolute, final. A king's decree that allowed no argument. But Lyessa had spent 22 years learning how to survive against impossible odds. She had one move left, one option that would protect Ravian from the trap Velor had constructed, even if it destroyed her completely. She turned to face Lord Velor. "You are right." Her voice carried across the silent hall. "The king made a mistake choosing me. I do not belong here. I am worthless. Hollow. Exactly what everyone always said, and I should never have accepted his offer." "Lyessa," Ravian's voice held warning, but she did not stop. Could not stop. Because this was the only way to save him. "I renounce my claim to the throne. I reject the king's choice. I remove myself from succession entirely." She looked at Ravian, willing him to understand even as she shattered both their hearts. "You deserve better than someone who brings you only trouble. The Empire deserves better. Let me go, please." The silence that followed was absolute. Velor's expression shifted into something almost resembling respect. "Well spoken, girl. Perhaps you have learned something during your brief stay at court." Ravian stood frozen, shadows dying around him, his face carved from stone. Then he turned and walked out of the hall without a word. Commander Shira moved to follow him, but he waved her off with one sharp gesture. The crowd began murmuring immediately, the sound building like rising water. Lyessa stood alone in the center of the hall, surrounded by hundreds of people who had just watched her destroy her only chance at being valued. She had survived being unwanted, had survived public rejection, had survived 22 years of being called worthless. But she had never had to reject herself before, had never had to speak the words that confirmed every terrible thing the world believed about her. And doing it to save someone else made it hurt in ways she did not know pain could reach. Lord Velor approached her, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. "You are smarter than I anticipated, sacrificing yourself to protect him. Very noble. Very foolish. I just want him to survive. He will survive." Velor's smile was cold. "But you, girl? You just sealed your own fate, because now you are useless to him. And useless things do not survive in this empire." He walked away, leaving Lyessa standing alone. Commander Shira appeared at her side. "That was the stupidest thing you could have done. I know, he will never forgive you for this. I know. Why did you do it? Because he was willing to burn the empire to protect me." Lyessa's voice broke. "And I could not let him do that. Not when I am exactly what they all say. Worthless, hollow, wrong." Shara grabbed her arm hard enough to hurt. "Listen to me. That man walked past hundreds of perfect women to choose you. He defended you against the entire empire. He was willing to lose everything rather than admit choosing you was a mistake. And you just threw that away to protect his pride. I threw it away to protect his throne. They are the same thing to him." Shara's voice turned harsh. "And now you have broken something that cannot be repaired." "Good." Lyessa pulled free, her chest tight with grief. "Then he can choose someone worthy next time." "There will be no next time." Shara's expression turned grim. "Because you just proved to him that everyone he trusts will eventually abandon him. That is the wound you left, not rejection, abandonment." The words hit like blades designed to kill slowly. Lyessa had not thought about it that way, had not considered that walking away might hurt Ravian more than staying and fighting, had not understood that sometimes the cruelest thing you could do to someone was confirm their deepest fear. And Ravian's deepest fear was not death or defeat, it was being alone again. "Oh God." Lyessa's legs went weak. "What have I done?" "Exactly what Velor wanted." Shara steadied her. "He manipulated you into destroying the one thing Ravian valued. And you walked right into it because you thought you were being selfless. Can I fix it?" "I do not know." Shara's voice softened slightly. "But you can try." "How?" "By refusing to leave. By standing your ground even when everyone tells you to run. By proving that you are stronger than your own fear." "I am not strong." Then learn. Cher released her, because Ravian is not going to survive losing you on top of everything else. Lyessa looked toward the exit where Ravian had disappeared, her heart breaking for the man she had just abandoned to save. She had made a choice, the wrong choice, and now she had to find a way to fix something she might have broken beyond repair. The reception dissolved around her, nobles leaving in clusters, their gossip already reshaping tonight's events into whatever narrative served their interests. Within hours, the entire empire would know. The king's chosen queen had rejected him publicly, had confirmed she was worthless, had proven that even she did not believe she deserved the position. Velor had won, and Lyessa had handed him victory by trying to be noble instead of strong. She stood alone in the emptying hall, staring at the dead servant who had died to make a political point. That girl had been someone's daughter, someone's friend. A life extinguished casually in service to power games Lyessa barely understood. And now Lyessa had become part of those games whether she wanted to or not, had become a weapon, a tool, a sacrifice on the altar of empire politics, the thing she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. Commander Cher's hand settled on her shoulder. Come. You need to rest before tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? Either you fix this or the empire tears itself apart. Cher guided her toward the exit. No pressure, Lyessa laughed, the sound harsh and broken. How do I fix something I do not understand? By becoming someone you never imagined you could be. Cher's voice turned hard. By stopping hiding behind unworthiness and stepping into power even when it terrifies you. By choosing strength over safety. I do not know how to do that. Then you will learn, or you will die trying. Those are your only options now. They walked through dark corridors toward chambers that felt more like cages than protection. Lyessa had made the wrong choice, had walked into Velor's trap perfectly, had abandoned the one person who saw value in her because she was too terrified to believe she deserved keeping. And now she had to find a way to become someone strong enough to fix the damage. Had to transform from the girl who survived by being invisible into a woman who could stand in the light and not burn. Had to change her entire nature or watch everything collapse. The pressure was impossible, the stakes were lethal, and she had absolutely no idea how to succeed. But she had survived impossible things before. Had endured being unwanted without breaking completely. Had learned compassion in a world that valued only cruelty. Maybe that was enough foundation to build on. Maybe not. But it was all she had, so she would use it, and either emerge transformed or burn trying. Because the alternative was accepting that she truly was worthless. And after everything that had happened tonight, after seeing the look in Ravian's eyes when she rejected him, after understanding what Velor had manipulated her into doing, she could not accept that anymore, would not accept it. Even if believing in her own value destroyed her completely. The game had changed, the trap had been sprung, and Lyessa Vane stood at the center of chaos with only one choice remaining: become the queen they said she could never be, or die proving them right. Lyessa did not sleep. She lay in the enormous bed staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed every moment of the reception. The dead servant, Velor's accusations, Ravian's expression when she rejected him, the look of satisfaction on Velor's face as he watched her destroy herself to save the king. She had made the wrong choice, had walked directly into a trap designed specifically for someone like her, someone so accustomed to being worthless that self-sacrifice felt natural. But sacrifice only mattered if it actually saved something, and all she had done was break the one person who believed she had value. Dawn arrived gray and cold through her windows. Lyessa rose and dressed herself without waiting for servants, pulling on a simple dress that did not require assistance. The expensive gowns hanging in her wardrobe felt like costumes for a role she had already abandoned. She opened her chamber door to find Commander Cher waiting in the corridor. I need to see him. He is not seeing anyone. Cher's expression was grim. He spent the night in the war chamber, destroying furniture and terrifying guards. I have to try. He will likely kill you on sight. Then he kills me. Lyessa stepped into the corridor. But I'm not hiding anymore. Cher studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Follow me. They moved through the palace as a morning light crept across stone floors. Guards watched them pass with expressions that ranged from curiosity to hostility. Word had spread fast. The king's chosen queen had rejected him publicly. The empire's future hung in balance, and everyone was calculating how to profit from the chaos. They reached the war chamber to find the doors guarded by 4 soldiers instead of the usual 2. The additional security was not for protection. It was containment. Commander Shara dismissed them with a gesture. The guards hesitated, glancing at each other, but ultimately obeyed. They had learned long ago that arguing with Shire was a quick path to reassignment or death. The commander pushed open the heavy doors. The war chamber looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Tables overturned, maps shredded, weapons embedded in walls, and in the center of the destruction stood Ravian, his back to the door, shadows pooling around his feet like living creatures. He did not turn. "I told you I was not seeing anyone," she insisted. Shara's voice was carefully neutral. "Then insist harder." Lyessa stepped past Shara into the chamber, her heart hammering but her resolve steady. "I am not leaving until you listen to me." Ravian went very still. The shadows around him stopped moving, frozen mid-swirl, as though waiting for permission to strike. "You made your choice last night." His voice was flat. "Dead. You rejected me in front of the entire empire, said I made a mistake choosing you. There is nothing left to discuss. I was wrong, obviously." "No." Lyessa moved closer, stepping over debris. I was wrong to walk away. Wrong to believe that leaving would protect you. Wrong to think that proving them right about my worthlessness would save anything." Ravian turned slowly. He looked terrible. Exhaustion carved deep lines around his eyes. His hair was disheveled, his formal jacket discarded somewhere, his shirt torn at the shoulder. Blood stained his knuckles where he had clearly been hitting things hard enough to split skin, but it was his eyes that made Lyessa's chest tighten. Empty. Completely empty. Like something vital had been carved out during the night and not replaced. "You were right about one thing." His voice carried no emotion. "You do not belong here. This world will destroy you. Better you leave now before it gets worse." "I am not leaving." "You already did. Last night when you stood in front of the entire court and confirmed every terrible thing they believed about you. When you proved that even you think choosing you was a mistake. I thought I was protecting you. By abandoning me?" Ravian's laugh was harsh and broken. "By confirming that everyone who gets close to me eventually realizes I am not worth the effort? That is not what happened." "Then what happened, Lyessa?" "Because from where I stood, it looked like you could not get away from me fast enough. The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was not entirely wrong. She had been terrified, had convinced herself that leaving was noble when really it was just familiar. Running away was what she had always done when the world became too much. But this time running had consequences beyond just her own survival. I panicked." Lyessa's voice shook, but she kept going. "Velor backed me into a corner and I did what I have always done. I made myself small and invisible and worthless so the predators would lose interest. But that strategy only works when you're alone. When there is someone standing beside you, making yourself worthless destroys them too." Ravian stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Why are you here?" "Because I need to fix what I broke. You cannot." "Then let me try." "Why?" His voice rose, shadows expanding around him. "Why does it matter to you? You got what you wanted. You are free. You can leave this palace and never think about empires or politics or the dying king who made a foolish choice. Because that dying king saw value in me when no one else did." Lyessa moved closer into the radius of his shadows. "Because he walked past hundreds of perfect women to choose someone broken. Because he made me believe that maybe I was worth something more than everyone assumed. And you repaid that belief by proving them all right." "Yes." The word came out raw. "I did. I let fear convince me that I was doing something noble when really I was just running away. Again. Like I have run from everything my entire life that required me to believe in my own worth." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the blood on his knuckles, smell the leather and steel and exhaustion clinging to him. "But I am done running, done hiding, done accepting that I am worthless just because survival is easier when you expect nothing better." Ravian's jaw tightened. Pretty words, but words do not repair trust. No. Actions do. And I am here asking for the chance to prove through actions that I am stronger than my fear. Why should I give you that chance? Because you bet everything on me once already. Lyessa held his gaze. And I'm asking you to bet on me again, even after I failed, even after I broke your trust, even after I proved that maybe you were wrong about my strength. I was not wrong. Ravian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You survived 22 years of being unwanted. That took strength. But last night you chose safety over courage, and that is the one thing I cannot forgive. Then do not forgive me, just let me stand beside you anyway. Why? Because we are both dying. Lyessa's voice broke. You from shadow poison, me from spending my entire life believing I am worthless, and maybe if we stand together, we can both survive a little longer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Ravian's shadows began retreating slowly, pulling back into him like breath being drawn inward. Commander Shara was right. His voice was rough. You are the stupidest person I have ever met. I know, and you have no idea how to navigate court politics. None. And keeping you alive is going to cost me more resources and political capital than it is worth. Probably. Ravian stepped closer, his massive frame crowding her space. But I'm too tired to keep fighting alone. Too tired to rule through fear without something to balance the darkness. Too tired to pretend that I do not need someone who remembers what humanity looks like. So you will let me stay? On one condition. What condition? You stop deciding what I need without asking me first. Ravian's hand moved to her face, tilting her chin up with surprising gentleness. You do not get to sacrifice yourself to protect me. You do not get to run because you think it is noble. You stand and fight beside me, or you leave permanently. No middle ground. I can do that. Can you? Because last night when the pressure mounted, you folded immediately. What happens when Velor attacks again? When the next crisis emerges? When the Empire demands your blood to maintain stability? I will stand my ground. Prove it. How? By walking back into that throne room today and reclaiming your position in front of everyone who watched you give it up. Lyessa's stomach dropped. That will make me look weak and indecisive. You already look weak and indecisive. Ravian's thumb brushed across her cheek. But standing your ground after being terrified shows growth, shows strength, shows that you learned from failure instead of being destroyed by it. And if they do not accept me back, then we fight until they do. His expression hardened. I am done negotiating with people who measure worth only in violence. If they want to challenge my choice, they can challenge me directly. That will start a war. We have been at war since the moment I took this throne. I just stopped pretending otherwise. A knock interrupted them. Commander Shara cracked the door open. My king, Lord Velor has called an emergency council session. He is demanding your presence immediately. Of course he is. Ravian did not look away from Lyessa. What is the stated reason? Addressing the instability caused by last night's events and determining next steps for imperial succession. He is moving faster than I anticipated. Ravian stepped back, his military mind clearly calculating angles. Tell the council I will attend, and inform them that Lady Lyessa will be joining me. Shara's eyebrows rose. Is that wise? No, but wisdom is overrated. Ravian moved toward the door, shadows swirling around him like a cloak. We are done being defensive. From now on, we attack. What is the plan? Make Velor regret thinking I could be controlled through manipulation. That is not a plan. That is a threat. Sometimes they are the same thing. They left the war chamber together, moving through corridors that felt different in morning light. Lyessa walked beside Ravian instead of behind him, a deliberate choice that announced she was reclaiming her position. Guards watched them pass with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. News would spread quickly. The king's rejected queen had returned. The empire's stability was about to be tested again. They reached the council chambers to find Lord Velor already seated at the head of the table, surrounded by his faction of nobles and military commanders. He looked fresh and composed, clearly having slept well after his victory the previous night. His expression shifted when Lyessa entered beside Ravian. This is a private council session. He did not stand. Lady Lyessa renounced her claim to the throne publicly. She has no standing to attend. She renounced nothing. Ravian moved to his seat at the table's opposite head, positioning Lyessa beside him. She made a statement under duress while being accused of murder without evidence. That statement is void. Velor's eyes narrowed. She spoke clearly and voluntarily in front of hundreds of witnesses. She spoke while you were manipulating her through coordinated psychological warfare. Ravian leaned back in his chair, deceptively relaxed. The dead servant, the shadow poison, the perfectly timed accusations, all of it designed to force her into an impossible position where any choice would make her look guilty. You're suggesting I orchestrated murder to undermine your queen. I am stating the obvious. Ravian's voice turned cold. You have spent decades playing political games. Last night was masterfully executed. You created a trap with no clean exits, and she walked into it perfectly. Then perhaps she is not intelligent enough to be queen, or perhaps you are too dangerous to remain on this council. The room went silent. Lord Velor stood slowly, his expression carved from ice. You are accusing me of treason. I am stating that your actions last night served to destabilize imperial authority and undermine the throne. Whether that constitutes treason is something we can debate after you explain how shadow poison appeared at my formal reception. I had nothing to do with that servant's death. Prove it. The same way Lady Lyessa proved her innocence? By answering questions designed to trap me regardless of response? Exactly. Ravian smiled without warmth. How does it feel being on the receiving end of your own tactics? Velor's hands flattened on the table, knuckles white with suppressed rage. You are making a mistake defending this girl. The Empire needs stability, unity, a clear line of succession that does not involve someone too weak to shift. The Empire needs change. Ravian stood, shadows rising with him. We have built a society that values only violence and dominance. That measures worth exclusively through power. And that system is collapsing because fear alone cannot sustain a kingdom indefinitely. So your solution is installing someone with no power at all? My solution is proving that value exists in places we stopped looking. Ravian moved around the table, his presence filling the space. Lyessa survived being discarded without becoming cruel. That is strength most rulers never develop. And if she can learn to navigate politics with the same resilience she used to survive Shadowfen, she will be a better queen than any warrior princess who knows only how to destroy. Velor turned to address the assembled council. You hear him. Our king is gambling the Empire's future on a social experiment, on the hope that compassion and kindness will somehow hold together territories we conquered through blood and steel. You built this empire on blood and steel. Ravian's voice cut through the room, and it is dying from the same violence that created it. Rebellions in every territory, populations that obey through fear rather than loyalty. A system so focused on eliminating weakness that it has forgotten how to build anything worth protecting. Then what do you propose? One of the military commanders spoke up. That we simply abandon the principles that made us strong? I propose we expand those principles. Ravian gestured at Lyessa. Strength without compassion becomes brutality. Compassion without strength becomes weakness. But together they create something sustainable. Idealistic nonsense. Velor's voice dripped contempt. This empire was founded on the strong crushing the weak. That is natural law. That is how power works. And how has that worked for us? Ravian faced him directly. We spend more resources crushing rebellions than we gain from conquered territories. Our strongest warriors defect to rival kingdoms because they are tired of fighting endless wars. Our population lives in constant fear of being discarded the moment they show vulnerability. As they should. Fear maintains order. Fear creates obedience. Never loyalty. And the moment I die, this empire will tear itself apart because no one has any reason to want it to survive beyond avoiding immediate punishment. Then perhaps the problem is not the system. Velor moved closer, his voice dropping. Perhaps the problem is a dying king who knows his time is running out and desperately wants to believe his legacy will be something beyond violence. The accusation landed like a weapon designed to wound. Because it was partially true. Ravian was dying, was running out of time, was desperate to transform an empire before the darkness took him completely, and Velor was using that desperation as a blade to cut him down. Lyessa watched the exchange, understanding with sudden clarity what was really happening. This was not about her, had never been about her. She was just the weapon Velor was using to destroy Ravian's credibility. Because a king who could not make sound decisions about succession was a king who could not be trusted with anything else. She stepped forward before her courage failed. Lord Velor is right about one thing. Her voice cut through the tension. I am weak. I cannot shift. I have no political training, no military experience, no connections to powerful families. Lyessa. Ravian's voice held warning, but she kept going. I am everything this empire was built to eliminate. Everything your system says is worthless, and that is exactly why I need to be here. Velor's expression shifted to something like curiosity. Explain. Because your system is eating itself alive. Lyessa moved to stand beside Ravian. You measure worth exclusively through power, through violence, through the ability to dominate others. And that creates a society where everyone is constantly trying to prove they are strong enough to survive by crushing anyone weaker. That is how natural selection works. In animal populations, maybe. But humans are not just animals. We build societies, create culture, develop systems of care and cooperation that allow us to survive things no individual could handle alone. And those systems require weakness to be protected instead of eliminated? They require understanding that strength comes in different forms. Lyessa's voice steadied. A warrior who can kill 100 enemies is strong, but a healer who can save 100 lives is also strong. A general who wins battles is strong, but a diplomat who prevents wars is also strong. Your system only values the first example and discards everything else, because the first example is what keeps empires alive. No, it is what keeps empires afraid. There is a difference. The council murmured, some in agreement, others in outrage. Lord Velor studied her with new interest. You have learned to speak well in just 3 days. Someone has been coaching you. Commander Shara has been teaching me how to recognize assassination attempts. Lyessa met his gaze directly. Turns out most of them do not involve poison. Most involve words designed to make you believe you are worthless until you destroy yourself to prove them right. Are you suggesting I tried to assassinate you with words? I am stating that you created a situation designed to force me into destroying my own credibility. And I walked into it perfectly because I have spent 22 years believing I am worthless. But I am done accepting that. Bold words from someone who renounced her position less than 12 hours ago. I made a mistake. Lyessa's voice turned hard. I panicked under pressure and chose safety over courage. But I'm here now to correct that mistake and reclaim my position. Not because I have suddenly become powerful, but because I refuse to let fear make my decisions anymore. And what makes you think the Empire will accept you back? I do not. Lyessa gestured at the assembled council. Half the people in this room want me dead. The other half want to use me as a political weapon. I have no illusions about my position. Then why stay? Because someone needs to prove that your system is wrong, that value exists in places you stopped looking, that strength and compassion are not mutually exclusive. More idealism. Velor's voice turned dismissive. The Empire has no room for idealists. Then the Empire will continue collapsing until someone makes room. The council erupted, nobles shouting over each other, military commanders arguing about tradition versus change, the entire room descending into barely controlled chaos. Ravian let it continue for exactly 30 seconds. Then his shadows exploded outward with enough force to crack the stone table. Enough. The single word carried absolute command. The room fell silent instantly. Ravian's eyes had gone completely black, his wolf rising so close to the surface that the air itself felt heavy with predatory intent. This was the Iron Alpha that conquered 7 territories, the warlord who built an empire through violence and dominance, the king who had spent a decade proving he was too dangerous to challenge. And he was done negotiating. Lady Lyessa is my chosen queen. That decision stands. Anyone who wishes to challenge it can challenge me directly. He let the threat hang in the air. No one moved. No one spoke. Because everyone in that room understood what challenging Ravian directly meant. Death. Swift and brutal and absolute. Lord Velor recovered first. You cannot rule through fear and claim to be building something better. His voice was calm, but his eyes blazed with fury. You cannot threaten execution for disagreement and pretend you value compassion. Watch me. Ravian's smile was predatory. I have spent 10 years maintaining this empire through violence because that was the only language it understood. But I'm tired, Velor. Tired of killing, tired of crushing rebellions, tired of ruling a kingdom that only respects me when I am terrifying. Then abdicate and hand the throne to you? So you can continue the same brutal system that is destroying us from inside? Someone needs to maintain order. Order built on fear is not order. It is temporary compliance waiting for the first opportunity to rebel. Then what do you propose? Velor's voice rose. That we simply accept weakness and hope compassion holds the empire together? I propose we stop treating strength and compassion as opposites. Ravian moved closer to his uncle, shadows swirling. I propose we build a system that values both, where warriors are respected for their strength, but healers are equally valued for their care, where leaders are measured by what they build instead of what they destroy. That system will collapse the moment you die. Maybe? Ravian's voice turned quiet. Or maybe it will survive because people actually want it to. Because they see value in a kingdom that protects instead of just dominates. You're gambling everything on that hope. I am gambling everything on the belief that humans are capable of being more than just predators eating each other. The two men faced each other across the council table, the king and his uncle, both of them representing entirely different visions of what the empire could become. Velor spoke first, his voice carrying deadly calm. You have forced my hand. I did not want this confrontation. But you leave me no choice. What confrontation? I am calling for a vote of no confidence. Velor addressed the council. Under imperial law, if 2/3 of the royal council believes the king is unfit to rule, we can remove him from power and install a regent until proper succession is established. Ravian went very still. You are attempting a coup. I am exercising constitutional authority to protect the empire from a king whose judgment has been compromised by illness and desperation. The council shifted uneasily, nobles glancing at each other, calculating which side offered better odds of survival. Commander Shira's hand moved to her blade, but Ravian stopped her with a gesture. Let him proceed. His voice was ice. Velor straightened. All in favor of removing King Ravian from power due to compromised judgment, an inability to make sound decisions regarding imperial succession. Silence. Then slowly, hands began rising. 1, 3, 7, 12. Lyessa watched in horror as nearly half the council voted to remove Ravian from the throne. These were men he had fought beside, territories he had protected, nobles whose power existed only because he had maintained stability. And they were abandoning him the moment it became politically convenient. The count stopped at 19, not quite 2/3, but close enough to demonstrate that Ravian's authority was fracturing. Velor smiled. 19 votes. You retain your throne by the thinnest margin, and we both know that number will only grow as your condition worsens and your judgment continues to deteriorate. What do you want, Velor? I want you to recognize reality. Send the girl away. Choose a proper queen from a powerful family. Solidify succession with someone who can actually unite the empire instead of dividing it. No. Then you condemn us all to civil war the moment you die. Perhaps. Ravian's shadows expanded, filling the chamber. Or perhaps I force this empire to evolve past the point where civil war is the only solution to disagreement. You cannot force evolution. Watch me. Ravian turned to leave, gesturing for Lyessa to follow. This is not over. Velor's voice followed them. You may have survived today's vote, but your support is crumbling, and when it collapses completely, I will be here to restore order. Ravian paused at the door. If you come for my throne, uncle, come prepared to die for it, because I will not make the mistake of mercy twice. They left the council chamber together, Shayera falling in behind them. The corridor outside felt suffocating after the charged atmosphere of the meeting. That went well. Shayera's voice dripped sarcasm. 19 votes! Ravian's jaw was tight. He turned half my council against me. He has been working on this for months, probably years. Shayera guided them toward the royal quarters. The dead servant was just the catalyst. He had already positioned his people throughout the council. So what do we do now? Lyessa's voice shook. Now we prepare for war. Ravian stopped walking, turning to face both women. Velor will not wait long. He has momentum. He will strike while the council is fractured and my authority is weakened. When? Soon. Within days, maybe hours if he believes he has enough support. What will he do? Try to kill me and install himself as regent. Ravian's voice was flat. It is the logical move. Dead kings cannot defend their choices. Can we stop him? Not through politics. Shayra's expression was grim. He controls too much of the council. Our only option is military force, which proves his point about me ruling through fear. Ravian ran a hand through his hair. If I crush dissent through violence, I become exactly what he claims I am. And if you do not crush it, you die. Shayera's voice turned hard. This is not theoretical anymore. Velor has declared war. You either fight or you lose. There has to be another way. There is not. Lyessa listened to them argue, understanding that she was witnessing the impossible choice Velor had constructed. Violence would prove Ravian was exactly the brutal tyrant everyone feared, but mercy would get him killed. Unless there was a third option. What if I challenged Velor directly? Both of them turned to stare at her. Absolutely not. Ravian's voice carried absolute denial. Why not? He is using me as the weapon to destroy your credibility. What if I remove myself as that weapon by proving I am not what he claims? You cannot shift. You have no combat training. He would kill you in seconds. Not in combat. Lyessa's mind raced, pieces falling into place. In front of the Empire. Publicly. Force him to defend his accusations with evidence instead of manipulation. That is suicide. Maybe. But it removes his primary attack vector. If I prove myself in front of witnesses, he loses the ability to use my supposed worthlessness against you. He will just find another weapon. Probably. But it buys us time to address the Council's concerns and rebuild your support. Ravian stared at her like she had lost her mind. You're talking about putting yourself directly in Velor's crosshairs. I'm already there. Lyessa met his gaze. At least this way I control the battlefield. You do not know how to fight. Then teach me something other than fighting. Like what? Like how to survive being attacked by someone who wants me to destroy myself. Ravian's expression shifted, understanding dawning. You want to use his own tactics against him. He manipulates through words and perception, makes people believe they are worthless until they prove it themselves. Lyessa's voice steadied. What if I force him to confront someone who refuses to accept that narrative? He will adapt. Find new ways to break you. Let him try. Because I have spent 22 years being broken and I am still standing. That has to count for something. Shayra made a sound that might have been approval. She has a point. Velor's power comes from manipulation and political maneuvering. Force him into direct confrontation and he loses his primary advantage. She also dies. Ravian's voice turned harsh. I will not sacrifice her to prove a point. You are not sacrificing me. Lyessa stepped closer. I am choosing this. Choosing to stand and fight instead of running. Choosing to prove I am stronger than my fear. By walking into certain death. By refusing to let Velor decide what I am worth. The words hung in the air between them. Ravian looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face for something she could not name. Then he turned to Shayra. How much time do we have? Before Velor moves? Hours. Maybe a day, if we are lucky. Then we use that time. Ravian's voice turned cold and calculated. If Lyessa wants to confront him publicly, we make it happen on our terms. Not his. What are you thinking? A formal challenge. Before the full court. Force Velor to defend his accusations with evidence instead of innuendo. Put him in a position where he either backs down or commits to direct confrontation. He will choose confrontation. Shayra's voice was flat. And then he will destroy her. Maybe. Ravian looked at Lyessa. Or maybe she surprises us all. I will try not to die. That is not comforting. It is not meant to be. Lyessa smiled despite the fear clawing at her chest. It is meant to be honest. Ravian reached out and touched her face with surprising gentleness. You are either the bravest person I have ever met or the stupidest. Probably both. Definitely both. He pulled her close suddenly, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. Do not make me regret betting on you again. I will do my best not to. They stood there for a moment, this dying king and the discarded girl he chose, both of them about to walk into a confrontation that would either transform the empire or destroy them completely. There was no middle ground, no safe option. Just the choice between fighting for something better or accepting that the world was exactly as brutal as everyone claimed. Lyessa chose to fight because she had spent 22 years accepting brutality as inevitable, and she was done surviving. Now she was going to prove she was worth keeping alive, or die trying. The game had reached its breaking point, and tomorrow, before the assembled empire, she would either become the queen they said she could never be, or confirm she was exactly as worthless as everyone always believed. The only question was which truth would survive the confrontation. The imperial arena filled before dawn. Word had spread through Dreadmarrow like wildfire. The king's chosen queen would face Lord Velor in formal challenge. Not combat, not a duel of blades or claws, but something far more dangerous in an empire built on violence. A trial of worth. Lyessa stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena, listening to the thunder of thousands of feet on stone as the crowd gathered above. Her hands trembled despite her attempts at control. She wore a simple dress, gray like the one she had arrived in, a deliberate choice that announced she was done pretending to be something she was not. Commander Shera checked the chamber's security for the third time, her movements sharp with tension. "You do not have to do this. There is still time to call it off." "No." Lyessa's voice was steadier than her hands. "This is the only way forward." "Forward to what? Your death?" "Maybe. Or forward to proving that value exists in places this empire stopped looking." The door opened and Ravian entered, his presence immediately filling the small space. He had not slept. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his movements carried the weight of someone operating on pure will rather than rest. He dismissed Shera with a gesture. The commander hesitated, then left, closing the door behind her. Ravian and Lyessa stood alone in the underground chamber while thousands gathered above to watch her either transform or break. "Tell me again what you are going to do." "I am going to stand in front of the Empire and force Velor to prove his accusations with evidence instead of manipulation." Lyessa met his gaze. "I am going to refuse to accept that I am worthless just because I cannot shift. And I am going to show everyone watching that strength comes in forms they stopped recognizing. And if Velor destroys you anyway, then at least I will have tried. At least I will have stood my ground instead of running." Ravian moved closer, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted his brutal reputation. "I am not good at this, at caring about someone beyond tactical value, at wanting to protect something fragile instead of just using it as a weapon. I know, but you have made me remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond just surviving until the darkness takes me." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "So do not die up there. Do not prove that hope is just another weakness this empire punishes. I will try my best. Try harder than your best. Because if you die, I burn this entire kingdom to ash and let the vultures fight over the remains." The threat was not hyperbole. Lyessa could see it in his eyes. The barely contained violence of a man who had spent 10 years holding together an empire through sheer will and was one loss away from letting it all collapse. She stood on her toes and kissed him, not gently, not tentatively, but with the desperate intensity of someone who might not get another chance. Ravian responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against him with strength that should have been crushing but felt like an anchor in a storm. They stood there in the underground chamber, this dying king and the girl he chose, holding each other like they could prevent the coming confrontation through sheer refusal to let go. Eventually they separated, both breathing hard. "If I survive this," Lyessa said quietly, "I am going to need you to teach me how to be a queen. If you survive this, I will teach you everything I know about ruling and surviving and protecting the things that matter." "Deal." A horn sounded above, the signal that the trial was beginning. Ravian's expression hardened back into the iron alpha the Empire feared. "Remember, Velor's power comes from making people believe they are worthless. Refuse to accept that narrative and you remove his primary weapon. What if refusing is not enough? Then you make it enough. Because the alternative is proving that compassion and strength cannot coexist. And if that is true, this empire deserves to collapse." He kissed her once more, quick and fierce, then stepped back. "Commander Shera will be in the crowd. If things go wrong, she will extract you. Things are already wrong. Lyessa smiled despite her fear. But I'm going to try to make them less wrong. That is all any of us can do. He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the stone corridor toward the arena entrance reserved for the king. Lyessa stood alone, listening to the crowd roar above as Ravian emerged into their view. Then guards appeared at her door, their faces neutral, their presence a reminder that it was time. She followed them up stairs carved from black stone, through passages designed to disorient and intimidate, toward the arena floor where thousands waited to watch her either prove her worth or confirm her worthlessness. The light hit her first when she emerged. Torches and morning sun combined into something blinding after the underground darkness. Then the sound. Thousands of voices rising in a wave of noise that felt physical. The arena was massive, easily holding 10,000 people in tiered seating that climbed toward the sky. Every seat was filled. Nobles in their finest clothing, warriors in ceremonial armor. Common citizens who had traveled from across the empire to witness this moment. All of them here to watch the hollow girl stand trial. The arena floor was bare stone, a circular space perhaps 50 feet across. At one end sat Ravian on a temporary throne, shadows pooling around his feet, his expression carved from granite. At the other end stood Lord Velkaris, flanked by his faction of council members, his silver hair catching sunlight like a crown. And in the center, a single chair where Lyessa was meant to sit, while the Empire decided whether she deserved to exist. She walked toward it with steps that did not falter despite her terror. The crowd's noise shifted, some cheering, most jeering, all of them watching with the hungry attention of people who had come to see blood spilled. Lyessa reached the chair and sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking visibly. A herald stepped forward, his voice magically amplified to carry across the arena. By decree of King Ravian Drakhar and petition of Lord Velkaris of House Drakhar, we gather to witness a formal trial of worth. Lady Lyessa Vane stands accused of being unworthy to serve as queen due to her inability to shift, lack of political connections, and insufficient strength to command imperial respect. The crowd roared approval. Lord Velkaris has called this trial to prove these accusations through testimony and evidence. Lady Lyessa has accepted this challenge to demonstrate her worth through response and resilience. The trial will proceed until one party concedes or the assembly reaches consensus judgment. The herald stepped back. Lord Velkaris moved to the center of the arena, his movements calculated for maximum dramatic impact. He was performing now, playing to the crowd, using every tool in his considerable arsenal of manipulation. People of Velkaris, his voice carried across the space. We gather today because our king has made a choice that threatens the very foundation of our empire. He has chosen as his queen a girl with no wolf, no power, no value beyond his personal fascination. The crowd murmured agreement. I take no pleasure in this trial. Velkaris' expression arranged itself into regret. But the empire's future cannot rest on one man's emotional attachment to someone fundamentally unsuited for leadership. He turned to face Lyessa directly. Lady Lyessa, can you shift? No. Have you ever felt your wolf? No. Do you have any combat training? No. Political experience? No. Connections to powerful families? No. Then what exactly qualifies you to be queen of the most powerful empire on this continent? The question hung in the air, weighted with the assembled empire's judgment. Lyessa stood slowly, refusing to remain seated while being interrogated like a criminal. I survived being discarded. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. I survived 22 years of being told I was worthless every single day. I survived watching my father drink himself unconscious to forget I existed. I survived my fiancé rejecting me publicly for someone stronger. I survived being invisible in a world that only values what it can use. The crowd fell silent, caught off guard by the honesty. That is survival, not qualification. Velkaris' voice turned dismissive. Rats survive. Roaches survive. Survival does not make something worthy of ruling. You are right. Lyessa moved toward him slowly. Survival alone does not qualify anyone for leadership, but what you learn through survival does. And I learned things in Shadowfen that no one in this arena seems to value anymore. Like what? Like how to see people instead of just resources. Like how to build instead of just destroy. like how to remember that the empire is not just territories and armies and power structures. It is made of actual human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of whether they can shift. Idealism. Valor's voice hardened. Useless idealism that will get people killed the moment reality demands hard choices. You think I do not understand hard choices? Lyessa's voice rose. I made hard choices every day just to survive. Choosing between eating and heating. Choosing between dignity and safety. Choosing between speaking up and staying invisible. Every choice had consequences. Every choice could mean the difference between surviving another day and being discarded completely. Those are not the same as ruling an empire. No, they are harder. Because when you rule an empire, you have resources and armies and people to buffer you from consequences. When you are worthless and alone, every choice is life or death, and no one will save you if you fail. The crowd was listening now, really listening, their attention shifting from Bloodsport to something else. Velor sensed the change and attacked harder. You speak well of your suffering, but suffering does not create competence. The empire needs a queen who can command armies, negotiate treaties, make decisions that affect millions of lives. What experience do you have with any of that? None. Lyessa did not flinch. But I have experience with the consequences of those decisions when they go wrong. Velor's expression flickered. Explain. The fire in Shadowfen's eastern district. Lyessa's voice turned cold. The one that left 12 families homeless. That fire happened because the Pack Council prioritized territory expansion over infrastructure maintenance. They made an imperial decision, allocated resources to conquest instead of community. And when the Tannery district burned, they argued about jurisdiction while people suffered. That is local politics, not imperial concern. Exactly. Lyessa stepped closer to Velor. That is the problem. The Empire makes decisions from a distance, allocating resources without understanding ground-level consequences. And when those decisions create suffering, the people making them are insulated from the damage. So your solution is what? That we elevate someone with no experience to make those decisions instead? My solution is that we include perspectives from people who actually live with the consequences. That we stop measuring worth exclusively through power and start measuring it through results. That we ask whether our decisions are building something worth protecting or just maintaining control through fear. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in outrage. Lord Velor circled her slowly, calculating his next attack. You speak of fear, but you are terrified right now. I can see it in your eyes, in the way your hands shake, in the way you are struggling to maintain composure. Yes. Lyessa met his gaze directly. I am terrified, because I am standing in front of 10,000 people who want to see me fail, because I am facing someone who has spent decades mastering political warfare, because I know that one wrong word could get me killed. Then why do it? Because someone needs to prove that being terrified and standing your ground anyway is strength, that acknowledging fear instead of hiding it is courage, that refusing to let fear make your decisions is power. Pretty words. Velor's voice turned sharp. But words do not rule empires. Action does. Decision does. The ability to make hard choices and live with the consequences. You want to see hard choices? Lyessa's voice turned harsh. I rebuilt homes for people who spent years mocking me. I fed people who spat at me. I memorized the names of guards who looked through me like furniture. Every one of those was a choice. And every one of them hurt because kindness in a cruel world feels like weakness until you realize it is the hardest thing you can do. The arena had gone completely silent now. Even Velor seemed caught off guard by the raw emotion in her voice. Ravian sat motionless on his throne, shadows swirling around him, his expression unreadable. Lord Velor. Lyessa's voice dropped to something quieter but no less intense. You keep asking what qualifies me to be queen, but I have a question for you. What qualifies this empire to survive? The question landed like a weapon. Velor's expression hardened. The empire survives through strength, through dominance, through the strong protecting what they have built. From whom? Lyessa gestured at the crowd. From these people? The ones you claim to protect? Because, from where I stand, the empire spends more energy crushing its own population than defending against external threats. We crush rebellion. We eliminate weakness. We maintain order. You create rebellion by treating people like resources instead of humans. You define weakness so narrowly that you discard everything that does not immediately serve violence. And you maintain order through fear, which is not order at all. It is temporary compliance waiting for the first opportunity to revolt. Then what do you propose? Velor's voice turned mocking. That we abandon strength entirely? That we build an empire on compassion and hope and idealistic nonsense? No. Lyessa moved to the center of the arena. I propose we stop pretending strength and compassion are opposites. That we recognize both are necessary for anything sustainable. That we build an empire people want to protect instead of one they want to escape. The crowd erupted, half shouting agreement, half shouting outrage, the entire arena descending into chaos. The herald moved to restore order, but Ravian stood first, his presence immediately silencing the noise. He descended from his throne and moved toward the center of the arena where Lyessa and Velor faced each other. The king stopped between them. Enough! His voice carried absolute command. This trial was supposed to determine Lady Lyessa's worth, but she has turned it into something else, a trial of the empire itself. He faced the assembled crowd. You came here expecting to see her fail, to watch her confirm every assumption about worthlessness and inadequacy. And she has done the opposite. She has stood here terrified and spoken truth anyway. She has faced someone who has spent decades mastering manipulation and refused to be broken. She has proven that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your decisions. The crowd listened with the same hungry attention they had given Lyessa. And in doing so, she has exposed something we have all been avoiding. This empire is dying, not from external threats, not from weak borders or insufficient armies, but from the inside. From a system so focused on eliminating weakness that it has forgotten how to build anything worth protecting. Velor stepped forward. So you admit she is right? That your entire reign has been built on failed principles? No. Ravian's voice turned cold. I admit that I have been trying to maintain a broken system because I did not believe change was possible. But she has shown me that change is not only possible, but necessary. By elevating someone with no qualifications, by proving that qualifications are measured wrong. Ravian moved closer to his uncle. You want to know what qualifies her to be queen? She survived being discarded without becoming cruel. She built instead of destroyed. She chose compassion when cruelty would have been easier. And she stood here today facing impossible odds and refused to break. Those are not qualifications. Those are character traits. Exactly. Ravian's voice turned deadly quiet. Character is the only qualification that matters. Because skill can be taught. Strategy can be learned. Politics can be mastered. But character? Character is forged through suffering and choice, and the refusal to let the world's cruelty poison your soul. And that cannot be taught. It can only be survived. The crowd murmured, the sound building like distant thunder. Velor realized he was losing control of the narrative. You are gambling the empire on sentiment, on emotion, on the hope that somehow this girl's character will be enough when real threats emerge. I am gambling the empire on the belief that we can be more than just predators eating each other. Ravian faced the crowd. For 10 years I have ruled through fear because fear was efficient. It maintained control. It crushed threats. It kept the territories aligned through terror rather than loyalty. He paused, shadows swirling. But fear alone cannot sustain a kingdom. Eventually people stop just surviving and start asking whether they want to live in a world that values only violence. And when that question emerges, empires built on fear collapse because no one has any reason to want them to survive. So your solution is what? Velor's voice rose. Abandon everything we built? Throw away centuries of tradition because one girl made you feel hopeful? My solution is evolution. Ravian turned back to him, recognizing that the empire needs both strength and compassion to survive. That we can value warriors and healers. That we can respect dominance and diplomacy. That we can build a system where being strong does not require being cruel. That system will fail the moment it faces real opposition. Then we build it strong enough to withstand opposition. Ravian's voice turned absolute. But we build it anyway. Because the alternative is watching everything I spent 10 years conquering tear itself apart the moment I die. The crowd had gone silent again, caught in the tension between king and uncle, between old empire and new vision, between everything they knew and everything they feared. Lord Velor stood very still, his expression carved from ice. You are choosing her over the empire's stability. I am choosing to transform the empire into something worth the sacrifices we made building it. Ravian moved to stand beside Lyessa. And she is the foundation of that transformation. Not because she is powerful, but because she proves that value exists in places we stopped looking. Then you force my hand. Velor's voice turned deadly calm. He reached into his robes and pulled out a vial of dark liquid that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Shadow poison. Concentrated. Lethal. The crowd gasped collectively. If you will not remove this weakness from the throne, I will do it myself. Velor held the vial up. One drop of this, one moment of contact, and the girl dies. Then you can choose someone actually worthy of the position. Ravian's shadows exploded outward, darkness filling the arena like smoke. Put that down, uncle. No. Velor's voice was calm. You have left me no choice. I will save this empire from your weakness, even if it means removing the source of that weakness permanently. He moved toward Lyessa with deadly intent. Commander Shira materialized from the crowd, blade drawn, but Velor's faction blocked her path. Ravian started forward, but Velor's other hand produced a second vial, this one aimed at the crowd. Move, and I release this into the arena. Kill hundreds instead of one. The king froze, his shadows writhing with barely contained violence. Lyessa understood with sudden, crystalline clarity what was happening. Velor had planned this from the beginning. The trial was never about proving her worthlessness. It was about forcing Ravian into an impossible choice where any decision would destroy him. Save her and watch hundreds die. Let her die and prove he valued her more than his people. Either way, his authority would be shattered. But Velor had made one miscalculation. He had assumed Lyessa would stand there frozen, waiting for someone else to save her. And she was done waiting. She moved toward Velor instead of away, her steps steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. The crowd gasped. Ravian shouted her name, but she kept walking, closing the distance between herself and the man holding her death in a glass vial. Velor's expression flickered with surprise. What are you doing? Proving you wrong. Lyessa stopped directly in front of him. You have spent this entire trial claiming I am worthless, weak, unworthy of standing beside the king, and you have used fear as your primary weapon because fear is what you understand. Stay back. No. Lyessa took another step. Because I am done letting fear make my decisions. Done accepting that I am worthless just because I cannot shift. Done believing that surviving is the same as living. She reached out slowly, her hand moving toward the vial he held. If you kill me, you prove nothing except that violence is your only solution to problems you cannot manipulate. You prove that when someone refuses to accept your narrative, you eliminate them rather than questioning whether your narrative might be wrong. Velor's hand trembled slightly. You are insane. Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of being afraid. Her hand touched the vial. The crowd held its breath. Ravian's shadows froze mid-swirl. Velor stared at her with something that might have been respect. You would die rather than accept that you are worthless? I would die proving that worth is measured wrong. Lyessa's voice was steady. That value exists in forms you stopped recognizing. That strength is not just the ability to dominate, but the courage to stand your ground when everything tells you to run. She pulled the vial from his hand gently. And I would die showing the empire that compassion is not weakness. It is the hardest thing you can choose when cruelty would be easier. She held the vial up for the entire arena to see. Then she poured it onto the ground at her feet. The shadow poison hissed as it hit stone, dark smoke rising where the liquid touched earth. Enough concentrated poison to kill dozens. Wasted, deliberately and completely. The crowd erupted into chaos. Velor stared at her with an expression that combined fury and disbelief. You just destroyed the only leverage I had. No. Lyessa met his gaze calmly. I just proved that your leverage only works on people who value their own survival above everything else. And I am done being that person. She turned to face the assembled empire. You came here to watch me fail. to see me confirm every assumption about worthlessness and inadequacy. And maybe I have failed by your standards. I cannot shift, cannot fight, cannot command armies or negotiate treaties or make the kind of decisions that emperors make. Her voice rose, carrying across the silent arena. But I can do something none of you have managed in centuries. I can remember that the people you rule are not resources. They are lives. They are families. They are humans who deserve to be valued for more than just their ability to serve violence. She moved to the center of the arena, standing alone beneath the weight of 10,000 gazes. So here's my answer to this trial. I am not worthy of being queen by the standards you have set, but those standards have created an empire that is collapsing from the inside, that spends more energy crushing its own people than protecting them, that values only dominance and treats everything else as disposable. The crowd listened with absolute attention now, and if those are the standards we maintain, this empire will die the moment King Ravian does, because no one will have any reason to want it to survive. No one will fight to protect something that has spent centuries treating them like they are worthless. She turned to Ravian. You asked me once why I stayed, why I accepted your offer when leaving would have been easier. This is why. Because someone needs to prove that empires can be built on something beyond fear, that strength and compassion are not opposites, that the people we rule are worth protecting for their own sake, not just because they serve imperial interests. Ravian stood frozen, his expression caught between grief and hope and something that looked like pride. Lyessa faced the crowd one final time. So judge me. Vote on whether I am worthy. Decide if compassion has any place in an empire built on violence. But know that whatever you choose, I will have stood here terrified and spoken truth anyway. I will have proven that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear decide who you are. She stopped speaking. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, someone in the crowd began clapping. A single person. Then another. Then 10. 100. 1,000. The applause built like a wave, starting with the common citizens in the upper tiers and spreading downward through the nobility, through the military commanders, through the assembled empire, until the entire arena thundered with sound. Not everyone applauded. Lord Velor's faction stood silent and stone-faced, but enough people clapped to shake the foundations of everything Velkaris had been built upon, because the empire had just watched a girl with no power stand her ground against someone who had spent decades mastering manipulation, had watched her choose courage over safety, had watched her value herself when everyone told her she was worthless. And in doing so, she had exposed the fundamental truth Velor had been desperately trying to hide. The empire's system of measuring worth was broken, and if a hollow girl could prove she had value despite that system, it meant everyone the empire had discarded might also have been worth keeping. That realization was more dangerous than any army, because systems built on discarding the weak could not survive once people stopped accepting that some lives were worthless. Ravian descended from his throne and moved through the applause toward Lyessa. He stopped in front of her, this massive king who conquered territories, and the girl who had just conquered something far more dangerous. Fear. You are either going to transform this empire or destroy it completely. Lyessa smiled despite the tears streaming down her face. Probably both. Definitely both. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with strength that should have hurt, but felt like safety. But I am willing to burn everything if it means building something better from the ashes. The crowd's applause continued, building into a roar that shook the arena's foundations. Lord Velor stood alone in the center of the chaos, his carefully constructed plans crumbling around him. He had tried to eliminate weakness, had tried to force the empire back into the brutal system that had sustained it for centuries, but he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had assumed worthlessness was an objective truth rather than a narrative that could be challenged, and Lyessa had challenged that narrative so thoroughly that the empire could no longer pretend it was absolute. Velor turned and walked from the arena without a word, his faction following behind him, their expressions promising that this confrontation was far from over. But they had lost today, lost the crowd, lost the narrative, lost the ability to use Lyessa's supposed worthlessness as a weapon against Ravian's judgment. Commander Shera appeared at Ravian's side. We need to secure the palace. Velor will not accept this defeat quietly. I know. Ravian did not release Lyessa. Double the guard, lock down the eastern wing, and arrest anyone caught with shadow poison. Are we charging Velor with attempted murder? Not yet. We do not have the political capital for that kind of confrontation, but we make it clear that today's events have consequences. Shaira nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Ravian turned Lyessa's face toward him gently. You terrified me. Good. She smiled through her tears. Terror means you care. I thought I was going to watch you die. So did I. Her voice shook. But I realized something standing there with that vial in my hand. What? That being afraid of death is not the same as wanting to live. And I have spent 22 years just surviving, just being afraid. But standing there, I wanted to live, wanted to prove I was worth something, wanted to build instead of just endure. You did more than prove your worth. Ravian's thumb brushed across her cheek. You proved that the Empire's entire system of value is wrong. Is that a good thing? I have no idea, but it is necessary. The crowd was dispersing now, thousands of people flooding toward the exits, their conversations building into a roar of speculation and debate. Some celebrated. Others argued, all of them processing what they had just witnessed. The Hollow Girl had stood trial and survived, not through combat, not through political maneuvering, but through refusing to accept that she was worthless. And that refusal had exposed cracks in the Empire's foundation that could no longer be ignored. Ravian and Lyessa stood together in the emptying arena as morning light climbed higher in the sky. What happens now? Lyessa asked quietly. Now we rebuild. Ravian's voice was tired but steady. We reform the pack ranking systems. We eliminate the worst abuses. We create space for people to be valued for things beyond just their ability to shift. That will take years. I have maybe 2 years left. So we will do as much as possible and hope it is enough foundation to survive after I am gone. Lyessa's chest tightened at the reminder of his mortality. How much time do we have? Months before the shadow